Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku was Demon King and had harem? Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Izuku Midoriya the Demon King by redfuryninja. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Not all men are created equal. This is the hard truth Izuku learned when he was 4 years old. This is my story, not of how he became the greatest hero or the greatest villain. This is the story about how he became a king. The king of his very own kingdom, Makai. A 4-year-old Izuku was at the park with his friends and noticed that Bakugo had strayed off and was standing over a boy on the ground with explosions crackling from his palms. "You shitty extra, you think you're allowed on my territory? I'm gonna teach you a lesson." He went to blast the boy's face when Izuku stepped in the way. "Stop, Kachan, this isn't right, it's not what a hero would do. You think a shitty Deku like you can tell me what to do? You don't even have a quirk, so you think you better than me? No, Kachan, it's just that heroes don't beat up random people. If you keep acting like a villain and hurting people, I'll have to stop you." Izuku then raised his fists. "That's it, if you're so adamant on stopping me, then I'll just beat you up instead." Izuku, who had no quirk, stood no chance against Bakugo, who could wield explosions and was suffering from many punches and explosions. "Ha ha ha ha, you shitty Deku, you're worthless, you don't have a quirk and you think you can stop me? You'll never be a hero, you don't even deserve anything. Where so you get off on saying I'm a villain? I'll be the #1 hero. No one can tell me what to do." Izuku was now in a ball, taking all of Bakugo's attacks and letting the words sink in. So what if he didn't have his quirk right now? He would unlock it and help people, unlike Bakugo, who just wanted to hurt people. All Izuku could think of was stopping Bakugo from hurting others like that boy and himself. This bubbled up into anger and rage. How dare Bakugo think that he could become a hero with an attitude like that, just abusing his power and hurting others. This rage then manifested itself as a wave of energy burst out from him, sending Bakugo flying back. Izuku stood up and grew in size, standing at a menacing 6 feet tall as black energy covered his body, making a black suit with a cloak forming behind his back. 2 giant red-black dragon wings spurted from his back and a 6-foot-long devil tail came out from his tailbone, and it had an arrowhead at the end. His one-screen eyes turned red and his pupils became slit, and his hair turned to a darker shade of green, and his ears became pointed as well as his teeth became sharp and pointed, with 2 fangs being longer than the rest. His hands changed as he grew scales over them, and they became claws. Bakugo looked up in fear when he suddenly couldn't breathe and noticed he was being lifted up by his neck, which had Izuku's tail wrapped around it. "You think might makes right. Just because you have a powerful quirk, then that means I can beat the shit out of you with no consequences, right? That's what you were doing to me. I should just stop a villain attacking people, right? It's what All Might and any other hero would do." He then punched Bakugo in the stomach and slammed him to the ground multiple times. "How do you like that, huh? Now you're the pathetic one. You're the extra, you are nothing when compared to me. Let me give you a reminder that you are a pathetic nobody that can only feel important by hurting the innocent and those weaker, just like a pathetic villain. Remember this, Bakugo, you are nothing, you are pathetic and act just like a villain." And with that, Izuku raised Bakugo to eye level before easing his claws and slashing Bakugo's arms, splattering his blood everywhere. He slashed his chest, leaving claw marks making an X shape. He dropped Bakugo onto the floor as he was crying and screaming, looking at Izuku hoping someone would save him. But no one came. The kid he beat up earlier was smirking at him. Why wasn't he helping him? He didn't deserve this. There were no adults as it was morning and it wasn't too far away, so they didn't go with the kids, and the others with them were knocked out lying on the floor. "We can't have you dying, so let's fix that." Izuku blasted a red energy at Bakugo and he was healed, but the scars remained, as did the pain. "The pain should remain for 24 hours and I can't have anyone ratting on me." He then fired red energy at everyone in the park that made them forget this incident and pass out except for Bakugo. "Now no one will believe you, no one will believe that a kid did this. Even I won't remember, so just grovel and feel pathetic as you suffer and can do nothing. Although I can't chance people believing you, so I'll leave you with this." He formed some energy and blasted Bakugo's throat with it. "There, now every time you try to talk about this, you'll feel immense pain and be unable to talk." Izuku then knocked Bakugo out and he walked further away from Bakugo to not look suspicious. He then fell unconscious as he shrunk and was a 4-year-old again. His wings were now small little stumps on his back, his horns were just slightly pointing out from his hair, and his claws retracted, forming a single green diamond on the back of his hands. His tail also became shorter, only being long enough to wrap around his waist. His eyes turned green, but his pupils remained slit and his ears were still pointed. His hair stayed black, and his teeth stayed the same as well as his pointed ears. It seems that the transformation only happened because he awakened his quirk in a moment of stress, and it wouldn't happen again, as it was because all of the quirk unlocking and all the energy being unleashed, his small body couldn't contain it, so it caused him to grow and change. But now that he has grown, the energy was sealing itself away, so he wouldn't be able to transform until he was much older, and the change would come over time, such as his wings and horns growing. An hour later, the parents of the kids came to check on them as they hadn't returned, but what they found horrified them. All were unconscious, and the park was ruined as there was blood splattered all around Bakugo. Mitsuki rushed over to him to see what was wrong and was relieved to find no injuries on him, but the scars are what terrified her, so she picked him up and rushed him towards the hospital. Izuku was also brought to the hospital as he did not wake up around the same time as the others, and his mother also noticed his new look and was concerned. Izuku woke up on the way to the hospital and asked his mom what was going on, however she didn't answer him and just kept driving. At the checkup, the doctor was quite impressed at the boy's quirk. It gave him increased strength, speed, stamina, durability, and regeneration. He also took note of the fact that Izuku said that he felt something flowing through him, indicating some sort of energy manipulation. He also saw that Izuku had 7 hearts after Izuku mentioned a weird feeling in his chest. With the new features and the demon-like quality of all of it, he came up with the name for it, Demon Lord. Well, Midoriya's, I've got to say, young Izuku has quite the impressive quirk. He basically has a superhuman everything, and with his demon-like qualities, I theorize he should be able to be stronger in the dark on top of the boosts he has, and see in it honestly you could become quite the amazing hero, young man. Although your powers are weaker now since you recently unlocked them, they'll grow to be quite strong in the future. Izuku was beaming. The last doctor who said he was quirkless was so mean and said he couldn't become a hero. This one was so nice, although he looked at his mother and frowned a little. She had a dark look in her eyes like she disapproved of him. It was similar to, but even worse than, the look she and his dad first gave him when he was diagnosed quirkless. Inko thanked the doctor as they left, leading Izuku by the hand, gripping his arm a little tight enough to cause him pain. He didn't realize it at the time, but with his new durability that would take some effort, so she was really trying to hurt him. On the way out, they saw Bakugo's mother, Mitsuki. "Oh hey Mitsuki, how's Katsuki doing?" The woman's face fell at this. "Not good. He woke up recently and he's just screaming in pain, and whenever anyone tries to ask what happened, when he goes to speak he just grabs his throat and screams in pain. I can't believe someone could do that to him." She then started to break down crying. They have him on as many painkillers as they can give him, but he's still hurting so much, but at least he's not screaming anymore. Inko decided to visit the boy. As they walked in, Bakugo's eyes widened when he saw Izuku. However, instead of feeling fear, he felt anger. Bakugo was a mass of pride even at this early age, so being humiliated and hurt instead of making him scared made him angry, and he didn't see Izuku as that scary grown-up form. That would have scared him. In his current small form, Bakugo did not fear him, so despite his body being racked with pain, tried to get up and leapt at Izuku to punch him. Deku. However, his body collapsed as it was not in a good condition. Mitsuki rushed to her child's side as she held him. "Oh my baby, don't push yourself, I know you're happy to see your friends okay." However, in her current state she failed to recognize that Bakugo's feeling of hatred towards Izuku and took it as excitement, not rage. "I think it's best if you two leave for now, Katsuki needs some rest." Inko nodded before grabbing Izuku and taking him home. Little did Izuku know that this would be one of the better days of his life in the next few years. When Izuku got home, he saw his father, Hisashi Midoriya, a man in his late 20s. He had brown shaggy hair and diamond-shaped freckles on his cheeks. He was smiling at Inko until he looked at Izuku and saw his demonic appearance, and his look darkened when he saw Izuku smile at him and he saw the sharp teeth. "Inko, what is that?" "Not now, Hisashi, later." Inko didn't want to talk about that thing at the moment. She really wasn't in the mood to talk about it right now. Izuku wasn't able to sleep that night because his parents were shouting at each other so loud at each other that he couldn't sleep. He wasn't able to make out all of it, but he heard key parts that made him cry. It was things like, "That demonic bastard," and "You demon birthing bitch." It continued like that, both insulting and shouting at each other, but the central point was that they kept insulting him. He was the focal point. They were fighting because of him. They hated him. All he could do that night was cry, and when he went into the living room the next day he saw Inko with a black eye and empty beer bottles and a clearly drunk Inko. When she saw him she glared at him. You fucking little bastards, it's all your fault. She then proceeded to slap him, which hurt her more than him. This enraged her even more. You little shit, I'll fucking show you. It's all your fault that he left, it's your fault I have this eye, you fucking demon. She then proceeded to beat him until he was unconscious. When he went to school on Monday, it wasn't any better. Inko had not fed him much and only fed him scraps that she didn't eat, so he was starving and had to walk himself to school, something which he hadn't done before, so he was late to class, where he was berated by his teacher for being late. On the playground wasn't any better. The kids were scared of his appearance, and those that weren't still didn't want to go near him, as Bakugo had gone around telling people that he was an evil demon. People didn't believe him, but when they saw him they started to. Suddenly people came over to him and Izuku thought they were coming to play when he saw Bakugo. Hey Kachin. Want to play? Like I'd ever want to play with you. Deku, you're just a demonic piece of shit. He then had his lackeys pin Izuku down as he started to beat him with explosions, and all Izuku could only lay there and take it, as he was extremely weakened, so all of his superhuman abilities were extremely weakened, as he had no energy and was still recovering from Inko's beatings over the weekend. He just cried and asked himself why it had to happen. Was it all because of his quirk? That couldn't be it. Why would people treat him differently all because of his quirk? He couldn't summon any power to fight back. He was so tired, so hungry, he just couldn't do anything except take it. Izuku's life became a living hell that day. This cycle would repeat on a loop for years. Beatings at home, they weren't so bad in the beginning, only punched here and there, and only when she was really drunk or angry did she properly beat him. But as the years went on, she drank more and more, and she had even changed the spare bedroom into a room for Izuku, but not any room, a torture room. It wasn't much at first, only a place to tie him up and leave him to starve or make him an easy target for beatings, but over the years it slowly evolved and changed, becoming even more horrific for the boy. And since the night gave him strength, but Inko made sure to keep him in a room with bright lights shining on him as he was chained in order to keep him weak. She couldn't have her punching bag gaining any bright ideas after all. It all got even worse for him shortly after his 8th birthday, the anniversary of when he unlocked his quirk. Inko was very drunk, more so than she had ever been before, and decided that just punching and kicking him was not enough, so she got her sharpest knife from the kitchen and brought it to the torture room after she had tied him up. Fear was evident in his eyes as he looked at the knife in fear as he tried to struggle. Inko had been beating him a lot recently, so he was quite weak. Soon she sent it flying, with it embedding into his shoulder, and she kept stabbing him repeatedly until her arms were tired. He wouldn't die though. She knew that as long as he had one heart, his regeneration would keep him alive no matter the wound, even if he lost his head, the downside being that he could always feel the pain of the wound. As she stared at him bleeding out while chained to the wall, blood splattered everywhere, such as the chains and walls. Even a bit was dripping from the ceiling. During this whole time Izuku was crying and pleading with her to stop, to show him the tiniest mercy, and just to stop. Please mommy, just stop, I promise I'll be a good boy, I won't be in your way anymore. I'll be a good boy, I promise, just please stop, please make it stop. However, this just enraged Inko. You little demon bastard, you think crying will change anything, and you dare to order me around. Me, I'll make sure you suffer, you demonic bastard. You're the reason my husband left, you're the reason my little boy is gone, you damned demon. She started stabbing him anew and even cut open his stomach, letting his guts leak out, causing him to cry more and beg for forgiveness. This became the standard for beatings in the future for Inko to relieve her stress and stay in good shape, as she got all sorts of different objects to torture Izuku with, and as they all got soaked in blood and as time passed, they all became rusty, making him suffer even more. Throughout these beatings Izuku learned multiple things, and it was the same with Bakugo as well. 1. Don't cry, it makes them feel superior and beat you more. 2. Don't talk back no matter what they say, as the punishment for not responding is always better than the punishment for talking no matter what is said. 3. Never be late or make them wait for anything. Making them wait just means they have more time to think what they'll do to you. And finally 4. Always do what is asked, even if it is at risk to himself, because the pain of doing the task will always be better than the punishment delivered if not. These 4 things would shape Izuku's personality into what he would eventually become. At times he would attempt to avoid beatings by trying to sneak around so his mother didn't beat him. And the same with Bakugo, but they would always find him and beat him. Even when he tried to tell the police about it, they just kicked him to the ground and threatened to arrest him. Even when they saw him being beaten, they just told the kids that they shouldn't use their quirks in public. Even the local heroes did nothing when he told them. They just glared at him and told them to leave him alone. doing odd jobs for people who took sympathy on him rather than fear him for his appearance so he could make money to buy food to get what little energy he needed to recover and gave energy to keep moving in life. These beatings, this hell that he was forced to suffer through, would change him, make him more cynical and cruel, would truly change him into someone else, someone far greater. It was the makings of a demon king. A 10-year-old Izuku was left broken and bleeding on the sands of Takoba Municipal Beach close to the sea, which had started going out. Bakugo and his cronies stared down at Izuku's beaten and broken form and sneered. "You're so pathetic, you should just fucking die." He then kicked Izuku in the stomach, sending him into the water. "Just save us all the trouble and fucking drown. Pray for a more heroic quirk in the next life. Hey, happy fucking birthday." He then stomped on Izuku's head, knocking him out before he and his sidekicks leaving Izuku lying in the water with the sun rising above him. No one looked back, for if they did, they would see Izuku's body being taken away by the waves. Izuku was taken out to sea floating amongst the waves, and he only started to awake when the full moon was high in the air. Izuku awoke as he felt the energy of the night seeping into his body, rejuvenating him and allowing him to recover much faster than before. Now that he wasn't constantly being injured, it gave his regeneration time to catch up on healing all of his injuries without new ones replacing them. He closed his eyes, taking in the rejuvenating feeling of his body healing, and used that time to think about how he got here. Years of being abused meant that he became used to waking up in unfamiliar situations, which is why he was so calm. The last thing he remembered was Bakugo kicking him into the water, then knocking him out, which meant that the retreating waves must have taken him with them. Izuku opened his eyes, feeling his 24 broken ribs finally set back into place, and with that pain gone he noticed a strange feeling on his neck and in his lungs, but he didn't have time to focus on that as he rose into an upright position and tried to look around him. As he trod water, he didn't see mainland Japan, so the currents must have taken him quite far, and since sunrise was about 5 a.m. with Bakugo getting up early just to give Izuku a special birthday beating. This meant he had been out for nearly 19 hours. Some good news was that he could see a small island in the distance, so with his body being much better with 19 hours of uninterrupted recovery, he swam towards the island. By the time Izuku got to the island, the sun had started to rise. The island was a lot further away than he thought, so when he got to land, he got a distance away from the water before he laid down and started breathing heavily. After a few minutes, his breathing calmed down and he got up to explore the island. After a couple of hours, Izuku got off the beach and passed through the forest until he reached the center of the island, where he found a dilapidated military base with a broken-down runway going down the middle. He looked around, seeing if he could find something to gain information on where he was. He ended up seeing signs on different buildings and recognized some of the kanji, so he realized that this must be a Japanese island. Knowing that he wasn't too far away from Japan calmed him down, but he was still in an unknown place, so he needed more information. And what better place than a library? He was surprised to find one in a place like this. After looking around for a while, he finds a map and discovers that he is on the island of Iwo Jima. Since the island was deserted, he wanted more information. He found the history section and started reading about the history of the island. He couldn't understand all the kanji as he had only been in school for 4 years, but he could read enough to know that it was a military base that was used in the early from 1945 to the early 2000s. The last entry that he could find was a small collection of papers detailing soldiers' last days here before leaving, as tensions between Japan and America grew, causing both sides to abandon the island as America used it to host something, but Izuku didn't know what. It was agreed that the island would be abandoned. Apparently, a historian wanted to leave a record of all these events on the island just in case anyone were to find the island, and so they could know what happened to the island. Izuku, deciding he had done enough reading, decides he needs to find a place to sleep. He needed a secure place to sleep, as while coming into the base Izuku noticed marks of different animals on the island, even some wolf tracks, so he was extremely lucky that he didn't encounter anything. With his quirk giving him boosted intelligence allowed him to realize that the wild animals that were allowed to live on the island evolved and expanded their numbers over time. A few heartless people even decided to leave pets behind. This allowed different forms of animals and wildlife to grow and flourish as the pets had become more feral, and eventually over the centuries that passed they evolved and grew bigger. The dogs slowly became more wolf-like over time. All of the other animals evolved into their former forms and grew much bigger. What Izuku didn't know was that the island was also a volcanic one, so over the centuries it expanded in size, joining up with multiple volcanic islands known as the Bonin Islands. These islands were more civilian-based, but when the dawn of quirks happened there were mass outbreaks of violence causing many to die in the fighting between the quirked and quirkless, leaving the remaining survivors to return to mainland Japan. What they didn't know is that with the island losing power and the people leaving, there was no one to watch over the few zoos that there were, and so many animals broke out and spread across the island, and by this point, the Bonin Islands and Iwo Jima were almost connected and were very close together, so the animals spread out, creating varied wildlife that could only be seen in places like the Amazon rainforest. Izuku soon found a sizable, unlocked house. As he entered the house, he found the key to the locks with a bunch of other keys hanging up on a wall. He gets set up, locks all the doors and goes to sleep. When he woke up, he realized it was one of the best sleeps that he had ever had. Izuku had the habit of sleeping lightly because Inko could come and randomly attack him at any point during the night. But last night he actually slept all through the night and felt more reinvigorated more than ever. He could feel a small amount of energy flowing through his body for once. He knew he had a form of energy, but it was always being focused on his regeneration that it didn't have time to build up and stockpile, and while he didn't have much after one day, it was more than he ever had, and he knew all his abilities would improve as he got older and as he got more energy. Izuku knew that the animals on the island would be a problem, but he also needed food and water. Any tinned rations were long past their expiration date, so he decided that it would be best to stockpile energy during the day and hunt during the night when his abilities would be boosted so he could defend himself. Izuku got into a meditative position inside of a dark room to boost his abilities, as darkness was where he got his boots. He used the rest of the day to gather energy, and with his body fully recovered he could gather a lot more energy. Night came and Izuku stepped out into the open. His energy unconsciously went to his eyes as they started to glow red, and the world around him grew brighter as he started to be able to see more clearly. He left the base and started to look around. Different footprints started to glow red as he inspected them. There were bigger ones that seemed to belong to wolves and others to foxes and deer in different areas. Izuku decides to go after the deer as he'd probably have a greater chance if he went after them than a pack of wolves. Following the glowing red footprints, he sees a herd of deer. His stomach rumbles as he runs his tongue over his fangs. It had been a long time since he had eaten and he was starving. It wasn't like Inko fed him frequently anyway. He was lucky his regeneration staved off the effects of being malnourished, but he was still constantly hungry. He felt his hunger taking control as he unconsciously channeled energy to his legs. He leapt forward with great speed and sank his fangs into the neck of one deer, ripping its head off. He then used the body as a springboard, as bright red veins unknowingly went down his arms, converging onto the diamond scale on the back of his hands. The scale started to move and expand. It didn't cover his whole hand but instead covered his fingers up to the knuckles and formed claws. Using them he slashed the neck of another deer, instincts and hunger driving him. He slaughtered the rest of the deer that couldn't get away quickly enough. Izuku licked the blood off of his fangs as he dragged all the deer into a pile. He knew he could eat raw thanks to Inko not feeding him and Izuku having to resort to eating raw meat to survive, although but wasn't as good as cooked meat. He used his claws to cut apart some trees to make a campfire to cook the deer. He tries to start a fire by striking his claws against each other, creating sparks. Energy seeped from his claws and caught the spark, creating a bigger flame, setting the wood on fire. Using his claws, he skinned one of the deer and cut it up before cooking the meat by holding the bone over the fire. He was only able to eat one deer before a pack of 10 wolves surrounded him, enticed by the smell of cooked meat and blood. Izuku didn't know what to do as the wolves started to circle him. There were too many to fight off at once. He may have recovered strength, but he was still inexperienced in combat and most uses of his quirk were all instinctual. Okay. Nice wolfies, I don't mean any harm. His body, feeling the need to survive, channeled the energy to his ears and the insides of his throat. The wolf's ears picked up as if understanding him. The head wolf then stepped up. He was extremely tall for a wolf, standing at 4 feet. He was pitch black and had a claw-like scar going over its right eye. It growled at Izuku, but he felt like he could understand it. "Grr, stand back boy, this meat is ours." Izuku blinked, not understanding how he understood it, but assumed it could understand him too. "Now calm down, let's work this out. Maybe we can work together. And what could a human like you do for us, grr?" Izuku energy started to come out of his body as it spread over the wolves, creating an oppressive aura, causing some to cower backward. Izuku was tired of living in fear. The fear of Inko, the fear of Bakugo. He could feel his power, his energy working in mysterious ways. He decided to show the wolves who was boss. "It's not what I can do for you, it's what you can do for me. I'm stronger, I'm faster, look at these deer. Can one of you do what I did today? He felt his anger rise as energy went to his palms as flames burst from him. Now we can share this hunt and work together or you can die. Izuku knew he was bullshitting. He couldn't take down this many wolves, but he could take down a few. After all, bullshitting was all about confidence, and the best lies are 10% lies and 90% truth. The wolves were concerned seeing the flames coming from his palms and the oppressive aura that was coming from him. The wolves were thinking of backing off, but the pack leader was not deterred as he walked up to Izuku, who was only a head taller. "Grr, you really think you can take me down, boy grr?" It glared up at Izuku as the surroundings started to become cold and a freezing mist came out of his snarling maw. Izuku glared back, "Oh, I can definitely take you down, you oversized puppy." He was playing on the wolf's pride. It's what he did with Bakugo, using his pride to try and reduce a beating, but this time he was doing the opposite, insulting him so the wolf would solely focus on him. "Grr, oh, you think so? Well, how about this? If you can beat me in a fight, my entire pack shall serve you, but if I beat you, we get to eat you and your entire hunt. You're on. But before we continue, my name is Izuku. Do you have a name? You can call me Fen." Fen leapt at Izuku, its claws bared, and went for a swipe. Izuku dodged to the side but was astonished to see ice start to form around the slashes in the ground where Fen had attacked. He has a quirk. This will be harder than I thought. Izuku went for a claw swipe of his own, but it only caused small scratches to form on the beast's incredibly thick hide. He cursed as he had to dodge a bite from Fen. He kneed the wolf in the jaw, but it didn't do much, and it gave Fen the chance to attack as he slashed at Izuku, who could only guard, crossing his arms, and a veil of energy formed around them which was shredded by the beast's mighty claws going through a large portion of Izuku's arms. However, they regenerated in a few seconds. Izuku had gathered a large amount of energy before he went hunting for this exact reason and had eaten a whole deer, so he wasn't starving either. This meant his energy wasn't spread incredibly thin, with keeping his body nourished and healing lethal injuries all while on a small supply. The night wasn't Izuku's hunting ground for nothing either, as the darkness boosted his abilities to even greater levels, allowing him to regenerate and fight an opponent at Fen's level. He wasn't holding back anymore. He was tired of that. He would fight back, and he would not let anyone look down on him anymore. The look in his eyes sharpened as he snarled, baring his fangs at Fen. His tail then wrapped around Fen's neck as he used it to pivot himself onto the back of the wolf, keeping his tail coiled around Fen's neck. The wolf snarled as it started bucking, trying to get Izuku off, even slamming into trees, but it wasn't working. However, something was working though, as Izuku could feel the ice spreading over his body coming from Fen's back, but he knew this was his best shot in beating the giant wolf, so he continued to slash, going deeper and deeper as energy coated his claws, allowing him to dig deeper, causing some serious wounds to form. However, the cold was getting to him as he slowed and started to freeze. It didn't help that Fen just slammed him into another tree. He was getting angry, really angry. His rage was getting to him as his energy started to shift and change, bursting out of his body in great quantities as he let out a scream, and alongside it his energy turned into fire, combating the freezing cold unleashed by Fen, who had by now frozen a good portion of the surroundings and crushed many trees. Gaw hhhhhhhhhhhrrrr. Fen howled out in pain as Izuku then felt words come into his head as he then spoke them aloud. Gleipnir. The fire twisted and changed, forming into chains, which twisted and turned, wrapping around Fen as Izuku's tail glowed red as it heated up. With the grip from the tail and chains getting tighter, Fen fell to the ground completely immobilized and bleeding out from just below his neck, and the rest of his body was being burned by the chains. Fen refused to submit as he tried to struggle against the chains, but it was to no avail. Izuku slashed Fen's face, causing slash marks to appear over his left eye. He went in for the finishing blow but stopped just before his claws hit Fen. Submit, Fen, you've lost. Fen just closed his eyes and stopped struggling. Just kill me. You were a worthy opponent. I'd rather die at your hands now than bleed out. Izuku released the chains in his tail as the fire dissipated and Fen lay there, blood pooling around him. No, I won't allow you to die, Fen. Izuku felt the last dregs of his energy go to his fingers as the claws faded back into the diamonds on his hands, but the pointer and middle finger on his right hand still had pointed nails as he stuck them into Fen's neck, feeling the blood in him go into Fen. As he was 10, he had no knowledge on medicine and blood, and in his 10-year-old brain it should work. Despite the fact that with a normal person, this would not have worked, it did have an effect as a light enveloped Fen as he started to grow even bigger. He was now 10 feet tall. And when the light faded, other changes could be seen. His eyes had turned from a dark green to a clear crystal blue. His claws had even longer and sharper and seemed to be made of dark ice. His tail had similar changes as it remained the same but was longer and had shards of ice covering the last 3 inches of it, with the spikes on the tip being exceptionally sharp. He stood up, and both Fen and Izuku looked confused, not understanding what happened. Izuku looked down at his hand, not anticipating this result. Fen then bowed down to Izuku, respecting his strength and tenacity. The rest of the wolves then mimicked their leader's actions. Lord Izuku, my clan and I are yours to command. Izuku smiled at the wolf as he put his hand on the wolf's head, smiling at his first subordinate. I'm happy to have you. With your new form I shall bestow upon you a new name, Fenrir. You shall now become Fenrir. Now everyone, let's eat. The wolves and Izuku proceeded to eat all of the remaining deer before everyone returned to the wolves' den to sleep happy and with a full stomach. Izuku sighed happily as Fenrir was curled up around him, blanketing him in a sea of fluff, happy at the start of his new life, away from Inko, away from Bakugo, away from all the pain that he suffered in Japan. It would take him time to fully get over his trauma, but this was the beginning. He had finally found a home. This island was now his home. He would conquer it and make it the paradise he never had. He would make this island his own. He would make it Makai. When Izuku woke up, he noticed 2 things. 1. He was wrapped in an incredibly fluffy and warm tail, and 2. Despite just waking up, he felt very tired. His energy levels were at rock bottom. He focused on regenerating it but noticed it was going to the newly named Fenrir. What was with that? He used energy to transform the wolf with his blood, but that was it. He focused on the events of last night and it clicked. Ever since he named Fenrir, there's been a drain on his energy. He then shook the wolf awake. Hey, wake up. The wolf immediately jolted awake, feeling better than ever. He'd never had this much energy before, but when he looked over to his lord, he grew concerned seeing the bags under his eyes. My lord, are you okay? It's okay, I'm fine. It was the best sleep I've ever had. I've never gotten to sleep on a full stomach before. It's just that all my energy is going to you, Fenrir. It was when he finished that sentence he felt the drain on his energy cease, and the energy that was just sent to Fenrir tried to go into the wolf but was sent back to Izuku. But what was more amazing was the fact that Fenrir was glowing similar to the one last night, but this time his form was twisting and changing to become more humanoid. When the light died down, his form was revealed. His height changed to 7 feet tall. He has long silver hair going down to his mid-back, silver wolf ears coming out of his head, and a large silver wolf tail coming out of his tailbone, all with black tips on the end. He hard sharp facial features with his slit ice blue eyes set wide in wonder at his new form, dressed in a sharp obsidian black suit and with a white shirt. Master, this is amazing. I feel so much more powerful. He tried to take a step forward but immediately fell flat on his face, not used to his new limbs and center of gravity. With this, Izuku realized something: he could make his forces extremely powerful, and by naming them he could give them energy until they absorbed all the energy they could and then used it to gain more power and a new form. Although they'd have to get used to it, this would help him greatly in taking over the giant island. And if he wanted to get his revenge, he'd have to teach the rest of them how to speak, read and write Japanese, which was gonna be a whole other issue, hopefully making them demons, what he was now calling those who were transformed, increased their ability to learn languages or have their own translate ability that he seemed to have. He picked Fenrir up and helped him to his feet. Looks like you have a lot to learn about being in a human form. Fenrir nodded and used his ice to make a stick to help him stand as he and Izuku walked towards the library of the military base to discuss how things are going moving forward. He was stumbling a lot, but with the staff and Izuku's help they made it there and sat down at a table. Can you tell me more about the history? Animals, territories and abilities on this island, of course. Many years ago, after the humans left, all were without powers. But slowly over time different species started to branch out and develop superpowers and quickly took over the parts of territory with little regards to the species that they once were. For example, the deer we hunted yesterday are completely separate from the super deer, who are much stronger. Those without powers have been hunted and left to breed so that they can be eaten again, so we don't have to deal with the powers of others. My pack was originally one of the hunted. That was until I was born with my ice powers and could stop the powered wolves as well as others and in this territory from hunting us, and we carved out our own territory. Izuku nodded along. I'm sorry to hear that. Fenrir shook his head. The weak die and the strong survive. We all do what we can to live. Izuku nodded along. He had forgotten that he was speaking to a wolf. Human common sense just didn't apply here. His power was interesting, though Fenrir was only speaking in grunts and growls and he could perfectly understand it. He felt the energy going to his throat and ears. It must be that which allowed him to communicate, not just that fact that he possessed a demonic power. These were thoughts for later. So who are the main powers that are in control then? Well, first within our area there's 3 main powers. The wolves, the foxes and the deer. Their strength is in that order as well. Of course each pack has powers allowing them strength over normal packs like ours. The deers have the smallest territory because the others oppress them with their strength, although they have the greatest numbers of the 3, which allows them to have some territory. But it's expected that if you leave your own territory you'll be killed by someone else. We're currently in the neutral zone where the weaker non-super animals live. And generally the non-powered outnumber those with powers because sometimes there's infighting or fighting between the factions. It gives many species the time to produce many offspring in hopes of one day producing a powered one that could protect our species, although there have only been a few cases of powered being born from non, and still. We are hunted, but they have an understanding that they're not to attack each other. I'm just barely enough to keep my pack alive, but now they just hunt the other wolf packs and animals instead of coming after me. Even the weakest of them is enough to handle any of those without powers. With this overwhelming power they keep all the powerless subdued, just waiting to be hunted. From what I've heard from some birds, the rabbits in the north have it the worst. Izuku grimly nodded. This situation was just like in Japan. All those who are weak are just squashed under the heel of the strong. Humans were really no better than animals, but he had to concede that there was no point feeling too guilty about it. The wolves he now lead hunted the powerless, and he himself hunted those deer. When he took over he'd have farms of animals for the carnivores. His problem with the situation stemmed from the powerful suppressing the powerless, but predators hunting prey was just nature and he would control it. Nature would bend to his whim. So if there's the 3 here in Iwo Jima, what about the other part of the island? I don't know what Iwo Jima is, but yes, in the south there's the 3 powers. Most of the regions have the 3 main powers with the exception of the west. In the north there's the birds who are the most powerful as they have a variety of species that formed a coalition. They are the most political of all the species, and the treatment of the powerless is even worse among birds, and because of this the less powerful of them act as information brokers, giving out info in exchange for favors and food, which is how I know about the different powers. Then there's the reptile tribe that is led by the snakes. They have the widest variety in powers and are extremely powerful. Then there's the rabbits who have the largest numbers, and because of that their genetic mutations are almost as great as the snakes, but are just under that because of the snake's leader. In the east there is the bats, many of whom have gained a human-like appearance. They've formed a very distinct society. They act more like humans than animals. I hear that they based their society on a collection of books. They're one of the few animals who ability to read. I suspect their ancestors learnt from the humans and it was passed down from their ancestors. They all share common abilities and everyone has a unique power on top of that as well, which has allowed them to stay as the top power in the east. The next eastern power is the livestock alliance of horses, cows and similar animals who came together to keep away all the predators that came after them. After that it's the insects who all came together after getting powers and boosts to their intelligence. The most dangerous is the west. It's so deadly that there are only 2 factions. There's the lions with their overwhelming strength, speed and durability, and despite their incredible abilities it's only enough to keep their current territory because it's the stronger out of all living creatures in this island, staying atop the mountains they created. They ate overwhelming beasts that split off from the reptiles long ago because of their overwhelming strength, and because of it, we don't have a name like the others for them, so we just call them monsters. Izuku nodded along, seeing the difficulty of the task that laid ahead of him. I see. I thought there'd be more creatures than just them. Fenrir shook his head. There are many more across the island, but they're smaller in number and strength and they cannot stand up to the might of the bigger packs, and this isn't even beginning to talk about the monsters that await in the ocean depths. If you don't mind me asking, my lord, what do you plan on doing with this information? My plan is to take over this island, bring all species under my control, and then take my revenge on those who scorned me in Japan, and then take over the country, and rule it how I see fit. Fenrir nodded along but was confused. But my lord, the 2 of us aren't nearly strong enough to take on all the forces in the south, let alone the other areas, especially the west. Izuku smirked at him. Then we just need to build an army. Fenrir tilted his head to the side. Izuku found it funny. He looked like a confused puppy. We saw that I can boost others' power either by naming them or giving them blood. Think how strong you must have become. Surely it's possible to do this to others. What if you give the other wolves your blood? We just need to bring other creatures under my command. Give them power and we can lead them against the other factions. He then got up and started looking around the library looking for something. Fenrir was confused but waited for his lord. After about 15 minutes of searching, Izuku found what he was looking for, and it turned out to be better than he expected. He wasn't sure how something like this existed or how it got in the library, but he's glad it was. Izuku brought the scroll he found to the table and spread it out, revealing a map of not just Tajima but all the connected islands. In fact, the map shows the current state of the island, and in the corner he saw something peculiar. The name on the scroll had initials that read out I.M.S. Those initials were familiar. Then it clicked. He ran and grabbed the history book that he had briefly read yesterday. He was confused. How could a writer who was alive so many years ago also possess a map of the current state of the Bonin Islands? Volcanic activity was unpredictable. And while you could predict that the islands would eventually grow and connect like it did now, no one from so long ago without quirks could accurately guess the exact shape and size of the island. Something was going on here and he couldn't figure out what. He shook his head. He'd figure this out later and look for more books and scrolls by IMS, but now it was time to talk strategy with Fenrir. After a couple hours of talking, it was decided how they should proceed, such as who to recruit and attack first and how they'll build an army to take on the whole island. Izuku decided they needed a name as well. Since he was ostracized, scorned and called a demon, he'd make a demonic army full of demons, full of creatures that had been granted his demonic power. First they needed to power up the rest of Fenrir's pack. Since Izuku gave Fenrir his blood, he wanted to see how the wolf's blood would affect others of his kind. After that, Izuku would name them all to give them new form and more power. After that, it would be training so the wolves could get used to their new power. Then they'd go around recruiting the other animals before starting off by going after the deer, foxes, then wolves. They'd go up the chain of power, getting stronger so they could take on the more powerful animals. Although that in itself presented a problem because they needed to eat and the wolves are carnivores, so they'd have to hunt some of those they want to recruit, and Izuku had a few at that moment, but he would have to look into those later. He's barely scratched the surface of what his powers are able to achieve, so there's definitely something he could do. After the strategy meeting, the two walked back to the base with Fenrir getting better along the way, eventually not needing his staff to walk, having gotten good enough to walk without aid, although he faltered here and there he had the hand of it. When they approached the cave, they were greeted by all the wolves, and Izuku quickly put his plan into motion by having Fenrir create a giant bowl of ice. The wolf man did so instantly with a look of satisfaction on his face. "My lord, your powers are truly amazing. I could never make large items like this so quickly before. This new energy that you have bestowed me with is simply astounding." Izuku was shocked. He thought that he'd just given Fenrir an increase in strength, but no, it was so much more. If he had an energy system like he did, that meant giving Fenrir's blood to the other wolves would definitely work. It also explained the connection he felt with Fenrir. It wasn't just a creator being able to feel its creation, he could feel his own energy inside that morphed and turned into its own system within the wolf man. Fenrir made large along his forearm and about a pint before it completely healed up. "It seems you have a healing factor, Fenrir, although it's slower than mine. If you're using demonic energy like me, how do you use it to make ice?" Fenrir looked confused at his lord for a couple minutes before making a small ice dagger in his hand before nodding. "Like it is for me, I'm guessing that it's you've used these powers instinctively and have no idea how this energy truly works. But focusing on what my instinct was doing, I could get an idea on the process that is happening. How this energy works now is different from when I had my power, although it functions the same, it's different. This energy, it freezes and solidified." He then held his hands and a crystal blue energy came out, different to Izuku's red. The energy then started to cool down the surrounding area and forming hexagonal prisms. Then they come together to form an object. The amount of prisms increases, then came together and formed 1 foot worth of chains. "Like this?" Izuku nodded. "Thanks for the explanation. I'll have to see if I can do it later. Now please continue." Fenrir soon filled it up enough for what they needed. Izuku then drew the attention to Pack. "Listen up. You all saw the changes that Fenrir went through and became immensely stronger afterwards. You will all drink his blood and it should allow you to gain powers. I don't know what kind of abilities will be granted, but you'll be inconceivably stronger afterwards. Then I will grant you all a name to give you a new human form that will grant you advantages over your opponents, such as being able to wield weapons." The wolves got straight into drinking the blood, no stranger to having blood in their mouths from their hunts. When the 6 of them were finished, nothing happened, making Izuku think it did work, but then suddenly were enveloped in a golden glow as they grew in size, and some even grew extra features. such as one wolf who had grown a horn in the center of his head. This was a better result than what Izuku was expecting. He could feel their power that was coming off of them as well, a small connection to each. It wasn't as strong as the one he had with Fenrir, but he guessed that was because he had not created these wolf demons directly. He could see the look of shock on Fenrir's face as he felt the connection to the 6 wolves. Now it was time to name them. He approached them, starting with the wolf on the left with the horn and moving along to the right as he named them: Ronga, Shiro, Kuro, Dorulu, Joan, and finally Bayo. After that, Izuku had collapsed. After all, his energy had burst out of him and had gone towards the wolves. Izuku didn't wake up for 3 days after that, the energy drain from naming 6 wolves at once having sapped his strength. When Izuku awoke, he felt fully rested unlike last time, but he was hungry. He assumed his body learnt from last time and waited until his energy was full again. If anything, it felt larger than it's ever been. There were 2 reasons that had to be considered for this. As he was growing, his energy would constantly increase, or the constant drain and recovery caused his reserves to grow. It's something that happened with his constant regeneration but could never take advantage of, because as he could heal more, the rate at which his injuries increased grew with his energy growth. Looking around, he didn't see any wolves, so he stepped outside the cave and saw that it was midday, so he assumed they must all be out hunting. Supposing he should join them to speed things along, he spread out his senses, but then he felt something alarming. His connection with Fenrir. Through it he could sense his life force decreasing dramatically, as well as fear. That scared him. Even when on the verge of death when he first fought Fenrir, the wolf felt no fear. This had to be bad if he was feeling fear, so he channeled energy into his legs and sped off to save his pack. Before Izuku saw anything, what hit him first was the smell of blood. When he arrived, he looked around and saw his pack, 7 in human form and then the other 3 in wolf form, all with varying injuries, some bleeding out in the ground, while the 3 non-transformed wolves had large gashes all over their bodies with purple blood pooled around them. Fenrir, despite while relatively uninjured, not having many visible injuries, was kneeling and had turned an unhealthy shade of purple. He was panting hard, like it was a struggle to breathe, but he still gripped his ice sword with determination while protecting the others despite his weakening body. Opposite them was a wolf pack 3 times the size of his own, although they had many more injured and dead, with frozen chunks of wolf scattered all around alongside trees and the surrounding ground being covered in ice. But the 3 up front only had a few bruises and scuff marks. Clearly they were the leaders, considering. The 3 looked quite different as well. They all were bipedal, standing on their hind legs. They also didn't look exactly like the wolves that were a part of their pack, like different species of wolf altogether, and Izuku recognized the species being gray wolf, maned wolf and a coyote. They were different colors as well, being blue, red and yellow respectively. The blue one was giant, towering over the others, currently standing at 10 feet tall, and was standing in front of the others, indicating he was the leader. Izuku growled, "Who are you fuckers and what do you want?" The blue one spoke up. "So you're the little fucker that changed these bastards. It's your fault we had to do this. You know we could have let them be, but we can't have a new power coming along. I give you shit stains 1 chance to surrender and join me or I'll annihilate you." The 3 wolves just laughed at him. "We took down your entire pack. What makes you think you stand a chance?" Izuku's eyes darkened before a wave of energy was unleashed from his body. "'Cause I'm stronger than all of them." His eyes started to glow as his energy coursed through his body. As his demonic features became more pronounced, his horns grew a couple inches, his wings going from small protrusions that later flat against his back to a more medium size and extended from his back, and the diamond in the back of his hands spread and formed gloves. The wolves, however, just laughed at him. "Ha ha 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 ha, what are those tiny little things supposed to do, Shortstack? You think you're intimidating?" Izuku lunged at them, claws extended, only to be met by a kick to the stomach from the red one. "We are the trio de danger, Bergamo, Basil and Lavender, leaders of the Sidra pack. You're just a tiny pathetic human who hasn't even named his own tribe." Izuku snarled. "I am Izuku, you pathetic beasts. I stand above you all. You'll fall to me, and the might of the Morning Star pack." Izuku then coated his hands and feet in energy, which transformed into fire. Unleashing an explosion beneath him, he launched towards Basil, who had kicked him before, flapping his wings, unleashing a burst of flames, allowing him to flip midair and dodge the kick. Although he was just barely able to deflect the energy blast that followed. He narrowed his eyes. Only one was attacking him. He'd make them regret not taking him seriously. He sped forward and met the kick sent his way with a punch, burning the foot. knocking the leg to the side before going for a claw swipe to Basil's back, but was stopped by a purple beam knocking him back. Despite it not having much power, he coughed up blood, confusing him, but that's when he saw the 3 dying wolves. His was their blood purple, and that's when he realized it. Fuck, it's poison, so that's how they defeated Fenrir. He was on a timer now, so he had to hurry this up. Red veins spread across his body as the energy within his body burned angrily. He went to attack the yellow one, Lavender, but had to barrel roll out of the way of a dropkick from Basil. It was now a 2-on-1, but he was full of energy and ready to fight. Next time Basil went for a kick as he attacked Lavender, he used tail to wrap around the wolf's foot, swung him round repeatedly before throwing him into a tree as he sent a blast of fire at Lavender from close range, singeing the mangy mutt's fur. Izuku growled his fire wasn't hot enough, he had to up the ante. He cupped his hands by his side, confessing the fire increasing its temperature before shooting them out and shouting, "Ha!" An inferno of blue flames met a torrent of poison coming from Lavender's mouth. The two battled against each other before the poison was overwhelmed, but Izuku had to dodge a kick from Basil, canceling the struggle. A barrage of calf energy blasts and poison came his way as he deflected them with his claws, not allowing them to touch any part of his skin. He could feel the poison from earlier affecting him, although it was slowing him down. That feeling was changing, morphing into something different. He could get close, but never close enough to make contact, and any blast he made could be countered. He eyed Fenrir out of the corner of his eyes and got an idea. He held his hands out in front of him like he was dripping onto something. Chains made of fire started to wrap around his wrists and forearms before extending to his hands, sharpening out at the ends, becoming blades. Izuku muttered only one word: chaos. He started spinning the blades' chains round rapidly and charged at Lavender and sending one blade at him while swinging at the incoming kick from Basil, wrapping the burning chain around his legs. Gah! Izuku smirked, dodging to the side of a poison blast but taking the red fox with him before wrapping his second chain around his neck. Got you, ya little fucker. Izuku channels his energy into the fire while using Basil as a human shield against Lavender. However, something strange happened. He felt his body getting stronger as his fire turned purple. Basil let out a pained cry as he slumped against Izuku, going limp. The blue one, Bergamo, seeing his brother in danger, had enough and charged in to help, no longer staying on the sidelines. However, Izuku just used Basil as a whip to bat him aside. Although it knocked him back, it didn't do any damage, and the wolf grew slightly bigger. So that's his quirk. He turns damage into power and it increases his size. Izuku started swinging Basil round faster and faster by the chain around his leg until he was nothing but a red blur. Basil was the launched at Lavender. However, there was one slight problem with this. Izuku never let go of his chain. A pained scream ran out through the clearing as Basil tried to clutch at his now missing legs and coughing up purple blood as his brothers held him in place, all while snarling at Izuku. Izuku just gave them a fanged grin in response as he tossed over the legs back to their owner. Here, you can have the back. Lavender tried to get up and help his brother as his hands were coated in a green aura this time, but he stumbled back down, clutching his ribs. That impact must have done some serious damage to him. Izuku knocked out Lavender with a shot of a purple energy blast to the wolf's face as he was distracted by the pain. He couldn't have him healing Lavender after all, not that he could do much now though. Bergamo, seeing his brothers incapacitated, decided to charge Izuku, the ground shaking as the behemoth thundered his way towards his prey. Izuku's smirk widened as he ran. He charged towards Bergamo. He had to roll to the side to dodge a giant fist as he went for a slash at the arm. However, this did more harm than good for him because the cut was shallow, the skin much harder than he thought it'd be, but it still made him grow a couple inches. Izuku scowled. He had to find a way around this. Deciding to up the ante, he launched himself into the air and started fleeing around the giant wolfman. He got an idea and charged for his mouth. Bergamo opened wide, aiming to eat Izuku as he snapped by. Izuku held the mouth open and blasted purple fire from his directly into the wolf's stomach. As the wolf recoiled in pain, growing to a titanic 20 feet tall, shortly after his cheeks gained a purple hue, causing him to constantly grow. Izuku's eyes widened. How? That's when he realized. His fire's been purple. He must have somehow gained a poisonous attribute. He then looked at the growing wolf. Shit! The poison was constantly damaging him, so he was constantly growing, getting stronger. The now 25 feet wolf smashed his fist on the ground, causing it to shake and quake. Fuck, he's way too strong now. Izuku tried all he could to try and weaken him, thinking if he just inflicted enough damage, but he just kept growing. And Izuku was running out of time. He could sense the life force of the wolves and they were getting dangerously low. He had to finish this fast and heal them somehow. If Lavender could then so could he. After the beating he had taken, Bergamo was now 50 feet and the poison was no longer affecting him due to his gigantic size. He was smoking racially and stomping all around trying to get Izuku, but despite being stronger he hasn't become any faster, so he wasn't able to hit Izuku. Izuku saw Fenrir now collapsed on the floor, unable to move. With this his anger had reached its boiling point, but he just froze in the air glaring at Bergamo with a cold fury. Izuku let out a breath, which became steam in the air. I will not let you take them from me. I finally got a family and I will not let you take that away. He let his chaos chains fare away as he held his hands in front of him as if holding coming. Letting his anger guide his energy and remembering what Fenrir had told him, ice swirling around his hands before forming into a katana, and he unleashed a slash, sending a crescent of freezing energy at the titan. It didn't do much, but Izuku could see him tense up. Izuku unleashed more energy and direct slash attacks, slowly freezing Bergamo. Soon the wolf found it hard to move as his muscles were starting to freeze. Izuku's eyes glowed a shining blue as he unleashed all but a small portion of his energy that he had to spare, forming a giant snowflake made of energy beneath Bergamo. The blue energy started to encapsulate him, forming a barrier and wrapping around him. Izuku held his ice sword in the air and muttered a single phrase. Bleak December. He then slashed down, causing all the energy to attack Bergamo, freezing him before forming blades of side which started slashing his flesh, all while leaving the ice unharmed. He tried to grow, but the ice was too strong, increasing pressure that was being applied to him. Izuku's sword shifted into a giant synth. He held it to Bergamo's neck, finally seeing fear win the beast's eyes. Have a fun time in hell, cause it's gonna seem like fucking heaven before I get there, cause you do not mess with Izuku Morningstar or his pack. With that he clenched his hand, crushing the wolf's body as he decapitated his head, causing it to fall to the ground in an earth-shaking thud. Izuku slowly defended to the ground as he used the rest of his energy to cover his back. Thinking back to the green glow that Lavender emitted, he thought about healing his pack on how his poison energy felt and reversed it. This only healed the poison damage but gave them enough energy for their healing factors to go into overdrive, slowly fixing any damage down. Except for the 3 wolves that were laying on the ground. He stumbled his way towards them as his demonic features retracted, no longer having the energy to sustain their current state, but he was still covered in the blood of his enemies. He knelt down to his wolves, leveled. Sorry that I never got to name you guys. Let me make it up to you. He then inserted his fingers into the wolves one at a time, only having scales on his middle and point finger in his right hand. He injected his blood into each of them. Rest well, Seer. Beer. Russ. With that Izuku collapsed, happy in the knowledge that his pack was safe. Even if it was just one of the many wolf packs as well as other animals they'd have to face in the future. Fenrir caught him before he hit the ground. Thank you, my lord, I was scared that in my death I would fail you, but it seems like I needn't have worried. All the wolves, helping each other, stumbled back towards the cave for a well-deserved rest. They had won. While it wasn't anticipated to fight so soon, they had won. Fenrir saw something in the corner of his eye as he handed Izuku to Kuro and Shiro as he walked over to Basil and Lavender, who were still alive. He looked down at them nicely before swiftly cutting of their heads before freezing all the heads in ice. They'll come back for them in the morning. Now it was time to rest. It took a week for Izuku to wake up this time. However, he could barely focus on anything other than his hunger. He'd now gone 10 days without food, and while his regeneration could stave off the effects starving would cause, it didn't reduce the pain caused by it. He looked around trying to see if there was anything to eat. Something blue caught his eye as he looked and saw many deer encased in ice. Fire started spill out of his mouth as it encased his jaws, and he charged broad at it, melting the ice and cooking the deer as he ripped them apart, not a shred of mercy. Blood and bone flying everywhere, but not a single shred of the meat was allowed out of his grasp. Fenrir watched this with a smile on his face, happy that his lord was finally awake, and he was definitely one of them now with the way he was eating. He had gathered and frozen deer for him every time they went on a hunt and saved one for him so that when he woke up he could eat straight away and wouldn't have to eat decaying flesh. After all the deer had finally been consumed, Fenrir spoke. Are you satisfied, my lord? Izuku nodded. Yes. Thank you, I really needed that. How's everyone been so far? Good, my lord. When we're not hunting, we're training, getting used to our new powers, getting stronger. Izuku nodded. He would need to train as well. He hadn't even scratched the surface on what his powers were truly capable of. It seemed like it could do anything and he only needs to discover how to do it. But that would have to wait for now. We made general plans last time but now we need to plan our next step. With that Izuku and Fenrir went back to the library to work on their immediate next steps. Izuku rolls out the map of the island. It had been marked with the territory lines that Fenrir knew of. So, it's best we start off with the deer. They have the smallest territory so it will be the easiest of all the territories, and after we crush them and bring them to our side it'll be the foxes, and with those numbers we should be able to take on the wolves. Fenrir nodded along. Fenrir, do you have any ideas on numbers? Not really, while all I know is that they have the most out of the three factions but are also attacked the most. The territory they hold now is all that they can hold with their numbers as they're more concentrated, but their numbers are easily over 300 perhaps. There is some information. Which means we'll have to build up our forces because while the pack has gotten stronger. Sure, they can take on groups 3 times their size, taking on enemies in the hundreds all alone. Yes, we can recruit the different animals of the neutral zone. There will be some that are too scared to go, but we should be able to recruit enough to be able to take on the deer. The trio de danger were the strongest of the Sidra pack. Very few deer could stand up to one of them, and they aren't even the strongest of the 12 wolf packs. Yes, I will fight where I'm needed, but if I want to build up a strong nation, its military can't solely rely on my strength. If I'm dealing with the more powerful leaders while their forces attack, my own troops need to be strong enough to fight them off. Fenrir agreed with that line of logic. If they wanted Izuku's pack to reign supreme, their weakest link would have to be better than the enemy's strongest chain. You and I will start off going and recruiting what species we can find in the neutral zone. Even if deer and foxes are prominent in the south, that doesn't mean that there are other animals. He then gets up from the table to scan the collection of books in the S section until he finds what he was looking for. It was another book written by I.M.S. It was titled, Species in I. The end was all scratched out and seemed to be covered in an energy, but no matter how much energy he covered the book with, the energy blocking out the final word would not disperse. His brow furrowed in confusion, but seeing as there was nothing he could do, he ignored it for now and laid in on the table. The first page showed an index showing north, south, east and west. However, flicking through the pages were blurred out just like the title, with many in the north, east and west being blurred, and only the ones Izuku knew were there already. However, there was a few species that were written in the south section. It showed hedgehogs, tanuki and monkeys. Izuku smiled looking at this. It wasn't much, but he could definitely work with it. Fenrir, I want you to work on recruiting the foxes and deer. You're more familiar with them. I will work on recruiting the other 3. The wolfman nodded. Yes, my liege. Izuku and Fenrir went back to the base to train. However, when they got back to base, Izuku was tackled down to the ground by a massive wolf and was then licked by 3 heads. Izuku laughed a bit as he pushed the big dog him and stood up looking at it on wonder at the 3 heads, recognizing them as the 3 wolves that were on death's door that he blooded and named. He also saw a snake wagging behind them instead of a normal wolf tail. What happened to you? The heads started bobbing as the middle one started speaking. Well, after you gave us your blood and named us, instead of healing, our bodies fused together, and instead of leaving our body it became a snake and replaced our tail. It then puffed out its chest as the 3 heads looked up with pride. And that is how we became the mighty Cerberus. Izuku then rubbed their heads. Good boys. The snake wagged itself happily as Izuku praised them. Now shall we train? The rest of the day was spent training with the wolves, figuring out how to use their new forms and powers. Izuku also experimented with his own power. Within this time training, Izuku felt that something was off with his energy. Whenever he used an attack, it would have a purple tint to it. It even caused some trees to decay. So he meditated and found 2 things. 1, his energy felt extremely toxic. That must have been the result of him absorbing Basil's poison. This was a quick fix by holding it all in place and stop it forming into the poison energy and instead convert it to its regular energy. Although it was an interesting thought that he could have his energy change within his body and combine attributes, having just created a poisonous flame. The next concerning thing was the energy connecting to his own. In fact, it felt very similar to his own. It was a line connecting to his chest, and when he followed the energy line it went out into the forest. It was like the connection he felt with Fenrir. This would require further investigation. However, he decided to train for the rest of the day and go looking for it tomorrow. In the morning after hunting, Izuku and Fenrir went out to recruit animals to their side. Hunting some for food may not endear them to others, but they needed to eat. It reminded him of when he saw Inko drunkenly watching a nature documentary while crying. She didn't want the zebra to be hunted, but the lion had little cubs that would starve to death without a meal. She wept for quite a while after watching it. Not knowing where to go to find the animals in the area, he followed the energy tether that he felt. It was strange that he didn't feel it before, but he assumed that it happened once his energy capacity, which was always on the rise, had crossed a certain threshold. Izuku followed the energy line until he arrived at a cave. Standing outside, he couldn't see inside at all. Even the entrance was completely pitch black. He saw the line go into the cave, and so he followed it. At first nothing seemed of, but as he walked further and further into the cave, he felt his senses being dampened until he could no longer see, hear or smell. He could barely feel anything, but his sense of touch remained. He channeled energy into his eyes and ears in hopes of restoring his sight and hearing. This worked well for his hearing, although it just barely worked for his sight. Despite his night vision and the energy he channeled into them, all he could see was blurs until he finally saw more color. It was a blurry golden glow. As he got closer, he could make out the figure of what he thought was a man. The golden glow seemed to be characters wrapping around him like chains. The man looked up, his golden red slitted eyes widened in recognition as he started looking into Izuku's vibrant crimson eyes. "Izuku, is that you?" Izuku took a step back, not knowing how to respond. While he couldn't make out the figure of the man, he was sure he had never met him. Before Izuku could respond, the man spoke again. "No, those eyes, they're different, similar but different." Izuku could only look on with confusion as the man rambled. "Ah, that's right, it must be around that time. I should have known. The resonance happened recently after all. Sorry for rambling. It's nice to meet you, Izuku Morningstar." This finally snapped Izuku out of his stupor, and the use of his new last name Morningstar confirmed that he couldn't have known this man in Japan, as he came up with that name here. "Yes, I am. Who are you and how do you know me?" The man gave a cheeky smile. "My name is Ogong, and as for how I know you, I'm afraid I'll have to keep that a secret." Izuku narrowed his eyes in suspicion but let it go, sensing that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of him in relation to his knowledge. "It must be annoying having such blurry sight. Touch the kanji wrapping around me. It'll restore you sight. I'm fine with my sight as it is." This, however, just caused the man to laugh. "Ha ha 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 ha." A tear fell from his eye. He went to wipe it only to remember he had all of his limbs bound by kanji chains, not letting him move even an inch. The laughing soon came to an end. "You really are exactly like he'd said you'd be." "I'm curious if everything he said was right or if he was exaggerating." "Who are you speaking of?" "You know him very well, but for now let's just call him my benefactor." Izuku scowled, but once again he let it go. "Fine then, tell me who you really are, or who you were before you got locked here." The man smirked. "Straight to the point. I'm surprised you don't know already. I thought you would have known by this point, but I guess it's not as good it will be yet, so I'll tell you." Izuku was getting very annoyed by this point with all the random nonsense this man was speaking. "As you know, I am Ogong, but what you don't know is that I am the Monkey King." This caused Izuku's eyes to widen. "I was once the leader of the powerful monkey faction, however, fearing our potential and my power, the monsters worked with the other races to kill and enslave my kind. But since they were unable to end me, they decided to seal me here among the weakest races, as they wouldn't have the strength to break me out." "How long have you been in here?" "It's hard to say, really. Time flows differently within this cave. From what my benefactor tells me, it's been about 100 years in outside time, but it's been about 500 years. This conversation had definitely been a rollercoaster of emotions, as he was shocked even further at the time this monkey had spent within this cave. "How are you still alive?" "It's my power. I'm unlike the monsters. The monkeys don't have a ridiculously long lifespan. Instead, I awakened a power that allows me to heal from anything and live forever. This is what allowed me to stay in this accursed cave for so long. Although in my younger years I pondered if death would be better, but I soon realized that the being alive is always better than being dead." "How strong were you with this power?" "In my day I was called Heaven's Equal. This was after I had defeated the heavenly monster Jade. It was after that my species and I became feared for our strength. I alone could barely hold off the monsters, but the other species then joined in. It was after that I was taken to this cave." "Are they the ones that cursed this cave?" "Yes. It was originally cave, if only very deep, but they decided that merely sealing me in here was not enough to compensate for the damage I had done to their pride, so they used their combined powers to take away the senses of all those who enter, with it getting worse the deeper you go." "How is it that we're talking then if your senses were taken away?" "That's where my benefactor comes in. He came here 105 years ago. He came in and altered my seal, allowing me to experience my senses once again. Ever since then he's come here a couple times a year giving me information on the outside world. And he told you about me. You could say that. Izuku decided it was time to get to the point. If I free you, will you serve under me? If you free me and help save those of my kind that still remain, I will serve you to the best of my ability, my liege. Izuku smiled. It would definitely be worth it if he could gain a powerful subordinate. I can agree to that. He first placed his hand on the seal, seeing that the monkey man didn't mean any harm. This allowed him to regain all his senses and see his new subordinate. He's a platinum white-haired man with fair skin. He is also a well-built kid with his long flowing white hair going down to his waist. Izuku could also see his golden cinder eyes more clearly now as well. So this is what you look like? The monkey gave a mischievous grin. Don't start falling for me now. Izuku scowled and punched him in the stomach. If he wasn't chained up he would have doubled over. Shut up, you bastard. He then focused on making his energy as corrosive as possible before also adding his new poison energy to it. Since the monkey was immortal he wouldn't have to worry about killing him, so he made his energy as destructive as possible before putting his hands on the kanji chains going across his chest and spreading to his limbs before blasting his energy across them. It took a couple minutes, but the golden soon changed to a dark purple. The areas they were touching on Ogung's skin also turned purple and he grit his teeth in pain, but he didn't make a noise. Izuku's brow furrowed in concentration as he focused on destroying the seal. It was stronger than he expected, but if it was made by the monsters, however, he soon found the alterations made to the seal, and nearby there were cracks. Exploiting those, he used them to destroy the rest of it, allowing for Ogung to fall, where Izuku then caught him. Ah, darkness, my old friend, welcome back. That's when Izuku realized that without the seal Ogung had lost all his senses again, so after 10 minutes of walking Izuku and Ogung had made it outside. The monkey had to shield his eyes as he was hit with sunlight for the first time in 500 years, as well as all the other sights, smells, sounds and even taste, as he was met with fresh air instead of musty old cave air. As Izuku set him back on his feet he stumbled a bit, not used to walking after so long, and his senses being overloaded causing him to lose balance and fall into Izuku, who caught him. Izuku looked into the sky and said, "You really weren't kidding about the time difference. Barely any time has passed since I first entered the cave. I still have other species to recruit to my cause before heading back to base." The Monkey King nodded, following alongside Izuku, slowly getting used to the outside world again. Izuku took the species book out of the bag had with him. He was surprised when he saw that the page on monkeys had more information on it and some info on Ogung. Did this IMS have any relation to Ogung? Deciding to look further into the book later, he turned to the pages on the Tanukis, where it showed the locations of where they can be found just east of the military base around the border of the foxes near a small pond. Taking the direct route near his cave, he saw it was empty. The others are out training or hunting then. This meant he could walk through quickly instead of stopping to greet his pack. Soon Izuku arrived at the pond only to see the pack of Tanukas standing their ground against a pack of three-tailed foxes with a four-tailed on leading the charge. Izuku was about to step in to stop the standoff when the fight started, some of the Tanukis starting to shift, some growing into giants, others shifting shapes and growing new features. The most interesting of the 10 Tanuki was the golden Tanuki that grew in size and its composition changed to be made out of sand. This shocked Izuku because he thought that most creatures in the neutral zone, but he guessed that's why these foxes were hunting them, similar to how some wolves came after his pack because of the increase in strength. However, they weren't alone in this, as some of the foxes grew in size while one made a giant form of blue fire. The skirmish began with the smaller foxes facing off against the mutated Tanukis. The smaller Tanuki stood no chance as they were blasted with fire and couldn't get in close. However, before a killing blow could land, sand wrapped around the Tanuki forming a shield. It went after the foxes but was quickly turned to glass from the fire. The same was the case for the giant Tanukis. Despite being bigger, going up against fire was a big issue to deal with. The only thing saving them was the sand shields. However, this meant that the leading sand Tanuki was distracted and couldn't put its focus into attacking and defending itself, which caused it to take an attack from the fire avatar, knocking it back. After seeing all this, Izuku decided it was time to step in. "I think it's time for you to shake of your rust, don't you think, Ogung?" The monkey man smirked as he held out his arm as kanji appeared on it and glowed before ice staff popped out of it. "This is my Rui Bang 2.0. You'll be hard-pressed to find a weapon better than it." Ogung then dashed forward and quickly swung his staff around before striking at the smaller foxes, knocking them back into trees before doing a backflip as his staff extended smashed onto the giant foxes in the chin hard enough to send it flying back, landing unconscious. While in the air he shrunk his pole before swinging and extended it, taking out the other two giant foxes, leaving only the fox within the fire avatar. As he landed he went to attack it, but he took a giant fire paw to the face. However, he wasn't stomped into the ground, but instead, he was inside the fire avatar, although this wasn't without cost as his skin started to burn and peel off only to be replaced by new skin as he cackled evilly. Ha 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 ha, yes, more, this rush, it's just like it used to be, bring me more. He then jumped up through the fire and punched the fox itself, sending it out of the fire, only for it to form another one, but this time it was even hotter. The fox was scowling at him as it went in for another attack and batted Ogung to the side as he just let himself be hit, using the momentum to bounce off of a tree to gain height before growing his Rui Bang, smacking it in the face before spinning and bashing its head onto the ground. He allowed himself to fall into the fox's head, his body burning much more rapidly than before. Walking through the fire, smoke starting to cloud his vision, but he could still see perfectly fine. He picked the four-tailed fox up by the neck and shouted, "Hey boss, do you want them dead or alive?" Izuku chuckled, seeing the monkey's attitude change during battle. "Kill that one, leave the others." Ogung nodded as he snapped the neck of the fox and throwing it at Izuku, who caught it, took aim and threw it in the direction of the camp, sensing Fenrir nearby and telling him to catch through the link. Izuku walked up to the tanuki, his energy going to his ears and vocal cords changing so they could understand him, which made him think. He was speaking Japanese to Ogung. How was the monkey able to do that? He shook his head. Questions for later. "Hello tanukis, I am Izuku Morningstar, can I have your names?" Most of the tanukis were too shocked or scared to go up to him, but the leader, the smallest sandy tanuki, strutted up to him. "I am Shukaku, the almighty god emperor of the Tanukas, bow before me." He does not bow. "Well Kaku, you didn't seem very godly against that fox." "My subordinate was the one that kicked its ass." Kaku looked at the bloody and smoking Ogung and flinched back. While I thank your friend for his assistance, I had to make sure I defended my subjects. If I could focus, those foxes would be a smear on the dirt like all those before them." And as he said that, the other foxes were swallowed up by sand before they were crushed into a paste before the bloody sand came back and went back into Kaku, although he didn't increase in size. "Impressive. Now Kaku, I want you to join me, join my pack. I will take over this island and all will come under my control. Help me crush my enemies, help me and show that the tanukis aren't one to be messed with." Kaku eyed Izuku up and down. "You don't look all that strong to me, you're just a puny human." Izuku scowled and picked the tanuki up by the scruff of his neck, his eyes glowing a toxic red, and growled out, "You pathetic little fucker, you couldn't protect your own and you think you have the right to question my power when I could crush you with a snap of my fingers." He then holds his hands and channels most of his energy, holds his hands in the air and shouts, "Taimatsu." This creates an inferno of blue flames that completely saps all the moisture in the air and incinerates a few of the surrounding trees. All the tanukis were knocked to the ground and sweated profusely, but that just instantly evaporated, causing a few tanuki to fall unconscious as glass started to form around Shukaku, before the fire finally came to a stop. Kaku stared at Izuku in awe at the power he displayed. "If I join you, would it be possible to gain that power? You may not gain the power of fire, but your strength and the strength will dramatically increase." As the other tanukis awoke, they saw their leader Kaku bowing down to the powerful man. "I Kaku the Almighty bow to you, my lord. The tanukis and I are yours to command." Izuku nodded. "I'm glad you could see things my way. How many tanuki serve under you total?" 30 total, although the C9 are the only ones with the power. "That's fine. I shall give them all power. Gather them all up and take them to the wolf cave by the city. Do you know where that is?" The tanuki nodded. "Ah yes, that is the territory of Fen. He counters my sand, so I make sure to avoid him at all costs. Well, he's my right hand. He'll make sure you get accommodated before I come back." The tanuki nodded before going off to get the rest of his kind before going where Izuku told him. "All right Ogung, one more stop before we head back to base." The monkey nodded and followed behind Izuku, who flipped to the hedgehog page in his book, seeing that it was north of the city alongside the border with the deer. When Izuku arrived, he saw a bunch of deer, some seemingly made of shadows, stomping around destroying the bushes and logs, seemingly attacking something. Izuku saw the little critters running around trying to save themselves. it seems like this wasn't one of the cases where the powerless were able to gain powers like Kaku and Fenrir. A deer was about to crush a hoglet underneath its hooves when it was met with a staff to the face. When Ogong went to smash another deer, it just phased right through as its shadowy head puffed into smoke. No matter what Ogong did to it, his attacks would phase through it, but at least his attacks had drawn the attention from the deer to him and they stopped attacking prickle of hedgehogs. When the attention was drawn to him, the shadows seemed to come alive and charge at him. And they successfully speared the man. However, he just ran along the spikes, widening the holes in his chest until he got close enough to smash open one of the heads, except his movements were stopped as he suddenly couldn't move. A shadow extended from the biggest black-furred deer with 2 scars on the left side of his face and connected his shadow to Ogong's own, freezing him in place. Shadowy hands started coming from his own shadow as well as the shadows that impaled him before. They started constricting around him, putting pressure on his body before arriving at his neck and started to strangle him. The deer were surprised when the man just gave them a savage grin. However, his smile ended when his head and the rest of his body burst, leaving him just as a bloody pile of meat and bones on the ground. Izuku, enraged at the supposed death of his new subordinate, charged in, fists ablaze as he slammed it into one of the shadow deer, completely destroying it. He then jumped at the leader, unleashing a fiery bicycle kick onto the leader, setting him on fire, sending him back face aflame, before using his flaming claws to shred the rest of the deer, leaving 5 dismembered deer on the ground. With the leader running away, his face was no longer on fire but it was wreathed in shadows, only showing the black eyes of the deer before it melded into the shadows. Izuku looked down sadly at the meat puddle. I would have liked to known you more, Ogong. I'm sure we could have been good friends, but don't worry, I'll avenge you. He was surprised, however, when the meat puddle started shaking and moving, slowly rising into the air, until a human body started to grow until the form of Ogong could be made out. After his body was regrown, a red energy that Izuku recognized came over him in new clothes, where Izuku ran forward and hugged Ogong. I'm glad you're okay. I thought you died. The monkey just gave him a cheeky grin. You forgot I was immortal, didn't you? I wasn't sure how immortal you were. I thought being turned into a meat puddle was too much even for you. The monkey stepped back from the hug and patted his shoulder. Shishishi, nothing can kill me no matter what happens. Izuku finally calmed down as he looked down at the hedgehogs looking up at him in awe. He heard squeaking for a bit before it was finally translated. Wow, that was so amazing. You two are so strong. You dealt with those deer like it was nothing. Izuku smiled warmly at the little creatures. Which one of you is the leader? The hedgehog with the biggest spikes stepped forth and stepped onto Izuku's outstretched hand. I am Nikki. Nice to meet you, oh mighty one. Izuku smiled at the little creature. Would you and your kind like to join me in my campaign against the powers of this island? To bring it under my banner? I would like to, mighty one, but we are powerless. We would be of little help. That's where you're wrong. I have the ability to grant incredible power to others. If you join me, you and your subordinates will be gifted with incredible abilities to able to take down those who would oppress you like those deer. The hedgehog beamed at him before bowing. My people are yours to command, my liege. Before he turned around on Izuku's palm and shouted for all those who could understand to hear. Prickle people, the mighty one seeks our assistance in his campaign against the OPRESSERS. And he shall grant us amazing power to finally show that us hedgehogs are to be feared, not tossed aside. We shall rise, we shall destroy the enemies in the name of our new lord. All the hedgehogs started shouting and cheering for their new lord as well as Nikki. This just sounded funny for Ogong as it sounded like a bunch of squeaking to him. With that, Izuku and Ogong led the large prickle of hedgehogs and smiled as he saw the sight at the camp. All the Tanukas were there alongside 2 foxes and 3 deer. It seems that Fenrir didn't have as much luck as him. Fenrir, it seems like you got some new recruits. He wolf man nodded. Yes, my liege, the translation ability that you taught me allowed me to recruit at least a few to our side. Though it seems you recruited many more than me. Yes, I did have great luck, and I want you to meet Ogong, the Monkey King. The wolf's eyes widened. A monkey? That's amazing. Monkeys are extremely powerful, only few are left alive and they're all very powerful. Ogong nodded, knowing the strength of his kin back 100 years ago was strong enough to be considered a major power, even if they were all far weaker than him. Even if the descendants were enslaved, their strength still could have grown. However, I believe it's time increase our fighting strength. Could you introduce me to those that you've brought? Yes, my liege, the foxes stepped forward. The first were the foxes. I am Q and this is my little brother Kilo. The rest of our skulk were too scared to fight against anything even after the power shown by Sir Fenrir. Only me and my brother had the strength to fight. Isn't that right, Kilo? The smaller fox meekly nodded before letting out a small, yeah. Next was the deer. The buck and doe stepped forward while the calf stayed behind. I am Santo and this is my mate Amy. The small one back there is my son Junior. We are tired of being hunted, being the prey. So even if that means teaming up with wolves and going against our own, we'll join you. Izuku nodded before speaking. Ogong, Kaku, Nikki, Hugh, Santo, come here. The five then stepped forward. He spread scales over this pointer and middle finger and extended his nails. Before pushing them into each of their necks and injecting a large amount of his own blood while also trying out something new, he brought forth all his knowledge on the Japanese language, and with unrestricted access to the library with his heightened intelligence he was able to master the language after pulling many all-nighters. This was only possible because of the extremely heightened intelligence GE had gained as a consequence of his demonic quirk. With the knowledge of Japanese he channeled energy from his brain to his blood as he pumped it into the creatures. Ogong showed no change, while Kyokaku increased in size, massively growing to the size of a wolf alongside gaining tattoos that ran along all of his body. Nikki turned blue. Hugh grew to a similar size as Kaku and grew 2 more tails with 6 little nubs sticking out near the other tails, an indicator of what was to come in the future. And finally Santo turned red and his horns turned black and grew in size. Now for your new names. Izuku, knowing the drain it could put on him and not wanting to be knocked unconscious, limited the output of his energy to slow the rate it went out. This way he could name all the animals and not be knocked out, although it would take more time for the naming process to complete. Ogong, your new name shall be Sun Wukong. Kaku, henceforth you shall be called Shukaku. Nikki, you are now Sonic. Hugh, your new name is Kurama, and Santo you shall be called Last. They all glowed but nothing happened, but this was to be expected. After this time had passed, it had taken 5 days for the naming process to complete, and Wukong had not changed but everyone had gained a humanoid form. Kaku had turned into a 5-feet man with sandy blonde hair and a lithe frame. He wore a simple long-sleeve red shirt and gray trousers. He also had made a gourd to keep large amount of sand with him at all times. Sonic had grown to 3 foot 3 inches, but he had not tuned into a human, only gaining some features like hands, feet, and became bipedal. He also wore white gloves and red shoes. Kurama had grown into a tall 6-feet man with bright red hair going down to his mid-back. He was dressed in a dark red kimono and sandals. Finally Last grew to be 7 feet tall with red hair and small black horns pointing out of his hair, although instead of gaining feet he kept his hooves. After the 5 leaders of the species had transformed, he had them give blood to the rest of their kin, where Izuku proceeded to name them. The other fox was called Miles per hour. 8 hedgehogs were called Alamaru, Midorimaru, Akamaru, Murosakimaru, Hiromaru, Turquoishimaru, and Shiromaru. Last's wife was called Amaya. The others were all given names. This process took 2 weeks for everyone to transform, and in that time everyone had begun training, and surprisingly Izuku's plan worked and everyone could speak Japanese, and he used his link with Fenrir to send the knowledge of Japanese to him and the other wolves. Izuku was also studying all he could in this tie to use whatever knowledge he could gain to use in the conquest of the Bonin Island, as well as increasing the strength of his own abilities, and since each creature had an instinctive understanding of their abilities he could learn to manipulate his energy like they could, since his was the original energy. It was through this that he learnt that no creature's energy was as adaptable as his. Sure, they could do a few tricks like his translation to animal speech, but Fenrir couldn't use his energy to produce fire. It stayed eternally cold. He did create an attack from trying to create fire, but it wasn't anything remotely close to fire. By the time September 1st had rolled around, he decided that they were ready to attack the deer. He didn't know how long this and the conquest would take. Days, weeks, months. It would probably take years to take over the whole island, but there was one thing that he did know for certain. He would win. After the month of training, all forces were now used to their human forms and their new powers. Future historians would record this day, September 1st, as the day the Great Makai War, that would last for a grueling 11 years. The 10-year-old Morningstar stands at the border that stands between the neutral zone and the deer territory, dressed in his military uniform. From the outside it looked like a normal business suit, with a black jacket and trousers with a red shirt. However, it wasn't any ordinary clothing, At Wukong's suggestion he learned how to use his energy to make clothes because when he transformed animals into a demon they only gained one set of clothes, and while it could be cleaned with his demonic energy easily, it would be best to have different clothes. He himself had been keeping clean with the nearby lichen, destroying all dirt and bacteria with his energy. With this he had created his combat uniform, because he made it very specifically. It didn't restrict his mobility and was incredibly durable. His force of 64 animals, up against a force of 495, Shukaku had learnt a useful ability, which was to create an eye out of sand, allowing him to see miles away with little effort. This allowed him to gauge the size of the enemy's fighting force. The odds were 7-1 and his troops only had a month's training under their belt, but the forces in the southern region were getting nervous with recent attacks failing, so he'd have to start now in order to gain more territory and convert the enemy forces. First they set up camp along the border so they had a place to retreat to. It seems the deer were aware of their approach, because as they closed in on a small area without trees there were 70 deer of varying shapes and sizes waiting for them. Izuku, who was currently atop a transformed Fenrir, who discovered that they all had the ability to revert back into their animal forms, observed the situation, deciding on what moves to take. Recalling one of the battle plans he and Fenrir had come up with, he called out to his soldiers, "Demons, today we fight. This is the first step to take down all WHO oppressed US, hunted US and scorned US. We shall take over the entire island and bring it under my rule. Now enter into formation A." Following their lord's orders they got into position. 10 men with spiky brown hair stepped forward, forming 2 groups of 5. They were the few hedgehogs who were fully transformed into humans rather than being a humanoid hedgehog. Large spikes started growing out of their arms until it looked like a large wall of spikes were facing the enemy. The rest of the troops started to form behind them, each group of 5 having 22 behind them, with the 6 leaders standing behind everyone. Charrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr clashed against the spike's wall. It was an even clash until more deer came back up. They looked like the deer that had clashed before, but they were larger, white, and had a gray beard. And with a cry of, "WYR deer," they glowed blue as the hedgehogs at the front were lifted into the sky and slammed down. The surrounding allies had to jump back to avoid being spiked to death. However, the 7 Chaos Hedgehogs Aomaru, Midorimaru, Akamaru, Murosakimaru, Hiromaru, Torkoishimaru, Shiromaru reacted in time, sent out energy beams in their respective colors of blue, green, red, purple, yellow, turquoise and white. They hit the several WYR deer and sent them flying back. Deciding to further their position, 4 tanukis charged forward, grew in size and changed shape, becoming giant tanukis instead of their demon forms. However, this would prove to be their undoing as 20 deer led by a golden deer started charging at them. The normal deer started growing to a ridiculous size. They almost matched the size of the giants as they went to impale them. However, sand came up to block the antlers, but it was destroyed as the golden deer's antlers started to glow a bright yellow as lighting started to rain down from the sky, turning the sand to glass and frying the giant tanukis, allowing them to be impaled by the antlers. It got even worse as once they were impaled, antlers burst from every point of their body, causing blood to gush everywhere, covering the entire battlefield in blood as they started to shrink back to their normal demon forms. "Dead, no!" cried out Izuku and Shukaku as they felt their connection to the tanuki being cut, but that's when they realized that one was alive. The tanuki demon had brown hair and green eyes, looking to be about 15 years old. The boy was wrapped in sand and quickly transported to Izuku and Shukaku for some healing. Before Izuku could start, they heard him muttering, "Fight. Fight. Fight. Keep on fighting. Kill those bastards. Bring freedom." Before he could fade into unconsciousness, Izuku held his hand over and sent a small amount of energy into the tanuki. He couldn't fully heal him as he needed to conserve his energy, but it was enough to keep him alive and kickstart his own regeneration. Although it was weird, instead of slowly stitching itself back together, he was steaming, and where the steam was, he was slowly healing, regenerating his injuries. However, considering the extent of it, he'd be out for quite a while, but he'd live. Izuku scowled. That golden deer needed to go down so they didn't suffer any more casualties at the hand of it. "Last, kill it," the deer man smirked evilly as he stepped forward. Last was dressed in a yellow and white suit which complemented his currently brown hair. It looked like it was made during the early 1900s. he clutching his cane his hands. It didn't look like any normal cane, it had a treble clef on the top with strings running down to the bottom where it looked like an axe. As he made his way to the front line, the light around the area seemed to come alive and form tendrils as they darted towards the golden deer. However, it was easily dodged it in a golden blur as clouds appeared above. Last How had made it in front of everyone by this time. Predicting a lightning attack, he strummed his can, playing it like a guitar, causing it to vibrate and release a riff sounding like an electric guitar. When the lightning stuck down, it stuck just above Last's head as it scattered around him, striking the ground. Foolish deer. With this, he held up his cane. This cane allows me to manipulate air pressure through my music. All I had to do was increase the pressure of the air around me, and the lightning would naturally take the path of least resistance and it forms a shield in case of other attacks. He then smirked evilly. In other words, I'm your worst opponent. Thunderclouds appeared all around Last and blasted him with lightning, but he was able to play a riff right before they hit him, causing them to be blocked. Now I do believe it's time I end you life. Last charged at the golden deer but was met by a wall of antlers. He tried for quite a while to break through, but was unable to as they kept growing back. Deciding enough was enough, he scowled as he aimed his head at the antlers, with his own starting to grow at a rapid pace as they wrapped around the antlers. Grunting with effort, he lifted all 20 deer in the air before having his antlers grow even further before stabbing into the eyes of all the deer. They then expanded, causing spikes to come out of all the deer similar to what they had done to the tanukis earlier. As the antlers of the deer shrunk, Last's extended, wrapping around the deer before he used their corpses as projectiles and threw them at the golden deer, who easily dodged, but since it was distracted by the corpses of its friends it couldn't dodge Last's attack. Last smashed its face in with its cane as it released a riff. The deer tried run away, but was met with a solid wall of air. You're trapped now. You stand no chance. Any last words? The deer then loudly exclaimed. Glory to the Nara clan. The sky darkened as the thunderclouds grew in the sky, until they became so dense that one could think it was night despite it being midday. Lightning arced across the clouds before pooling in the sky before forming a dragon. Last's eyes widened seeing this, not liking where it was going, so before the attack could begin, he shrunk the barrier and grabbed the golden deer and held it above his head. He used his light tendrils to play a riff as the barrier around him disappeared, and he increased the density above him as much as he could. You're a fool. You think you can survive this? Now kill him. Kirin. The lightning dragon came crashing down from the sky faster than anyone could react, faster than normal lightning, as it stuck Last, blasting through all his barriers with little difficulty, first striking the golden deer but then going through to Last. The lightning kept coming down for 5 minutes straight, and Last screamed in agony the entire time, before it came to an end. Last collapsed to the ground with the golden deer. Both were charred beyond recognition, but Izuku could see Last very slowly regenerating, while the static electricity that remained around the area from the attack started going towards the golden deer as it too started to slowly recover. Icy chains came from Izuku's palm and wrapped around the two, bringing them to him. That deer was too powerful to leave and let it live as an enemy, but he was busy now, so he decided to leave it in chains and deal with later, while he sent enough energy to Last to speed up his recovery. Hopefully he'd recover soon. He was in a much better condition than Eren after all. Izuku felt a psychic energy wrap around and hold him in place. He looked ahead to see 18 deer. They looked similar to the WYR deer but smaller and brown. They were visibly straining as they chanted, Standler, repeatedly. Annoyed at this and at the death of his subjects, he easily broke through the restricting energy and held out his hand. Die, you pathetic scum. He blasted fire at them, causing all but the biggest to die. He only survived due to his size. He seemed to be twice as big as any other Standler. Izuku looked into the sky, seeing the sun start to set. Depending on the abilities of the remaining deer, this could carry on to the next day. As he had this thought, he saw 20 green deer stare at him with glowing emerald eyes as a hurricane descended from the heavens. Fuck my life. No one under his current command had the ability to combat a hurricane, not even a tornado. A fucking hurricane. All forces fall back, get as far away as you can, I'll hold it off as long as I can once it ends, charge in. Nodding, the rest of his forces started to flee. Expect for 8, it was Sonic and the 7 Chaos Hedgehogs. Looks like you could use some help, boss. Sonic, you don't have the abilities to stop a hurricane, and those who do have an ability to assist aren't strong enough to help with a hurricane of that magnitude. Sonic just shook his head and waved his weirdly white-gloved finger. That's where you're wrong, bossman. Me and the Chaos Hedgehogs have come up with a little technique that could help. He jumped into the air and was blasted by each of the beams. This also had the side effect of keeping him in the air. The 7 hedgehogs turned into gems as the beams intensified before they disappeared. Sonic shouted, "Chaos Control!" before he was bathed in a golden light, and when it died down he looked different. His hair spiked up and turned a brilliant shining gold. Wukong in the distance widened his eyes. He didn't think he would see that sight ever again, and on a hedgehog of all things. This is the power of all 8 of us combined. I'm sure we can be of some assistance. Izuku nodded as he started to grow, starting to look much older as his wings, tail and horns expanded. He grew claws as he started to flying. Be careful what you use to stop it. We can't risk making it more deadly by adding fire or shrapnel like ice shards. Izuku stared at the hurricane heading his way. He couldn't even see the opposing deer anymore. In fact, when he looked in front of him, all he could see was the hurricane, alongside all of the trees and other objects it had already ripped from the ground. The winds whipped around him as the hurricane barreled towards him. Izuku's eyes glowed a bright crimson, blocking out any other features of his eyes. He screamed, letting out energy blasts at the hurricane, stopping it for only a few seconds before it continued moving. Something golden caught his eyes as he saw a golden ring start to wrap around the hurricane. When he focused, he realized it was Sonic moving faster than sound as he flew in the opposite direction that the hurricane was spinning, in an attempt to stop it or at the very least slow it down. The hurricane slowed a little, but it wasn't by much. Izuku was happy there was someone to help. He knew he'd be here for quite a while, so he was glad that the golden deer had put so many clouds in the sky as it had made it darker. Izuku channeled all of his available energy as he raised his tail over his head and then fired. His hands were thrust forward as energy blasted from them. His eyes glowed as energy beamed out. He opened his mouth and shot energy out, and finally as energy pooled around the tip of his tail it beamed out it. The energy beams all spiraled together before hitting the hurricane and slammed into the hurricane, stopping its forward momentum, keeping it spinning in the same spot. Izuku was glad for all of his training before this. It allowed him to use his energy more efficiently, as well as his energy that kept increasing day by day. In fact, for the week leading up to this battle he had stockpiled as much energy as he could, and he was glad he did. He could have used it to fully heal Last and Eren in seconds, but he knew he would need it for something else, and this was it, although he imagined he would fight a powerful opponent, not an entire fucking hurricane. Izuku and Sonic kept their offense up for hours. It was a battle of wills against the deer. However, not everyone could keep on going as the golden light spinning around the hurricane dies out as Sonic slingshotted round it and crashed through Wukong, sending the monkeyman's organs flying. Izuku grunted in exertion as the support that Sonic was giving. However, he grinned as the deers started to buckle and fall. Ordinarily they wouldn't have lasted so long, but there were 20 of them, so the energy drain was split evenly instead of being focused solely on a single person. Izuku's grin was soon wiped off of his face as he saw the deer sending energy towards the wind deer. Oh fuck my life. He upped his power output to compensate for the lack of Sonic and lasted for another 2 hours. He felt his energy reserves finally start to tap out. Even with the moon starting to rise in the sky, his energy consumption was just slightly greater than his energy regeneration, and he was now running on fumes. Fucking bastards, Izuku growled out. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. He couldn't let this mass of wind run wild. He'd already lost some of his already small forces. He couldn't risk losing any more. But soon enough, his tanks hit rock bottom and his features began to shrink until he was back to his original form. The deer seized this opportunity as tendrils of wind extended out of the hurricane and smacked Izuku, sending him back into the forest. Before he could crash into a tree, he was caught by a cascade of sand, using his moment to safely take him to the ground where Fenrir caught him. Izuku thanked the wolfman as he stood up but took a step forward as his exhaustion caught up with him. While direct energy manipulation wasn't as consuming as converting into something like fire or ice, using it for that long definitely draining. We need to do something. Any ideas? Izuku was panting between each breath, but it was getting better as he felt his energy refilling. It's another thing he trained in, his energy regeneration. While it took effort to store more energy than he normally could, it took time and was hard to contain it all without losing it, which is why his refilling energy didn't keep going. He did in fact have a capacity, and refilling his capacity in comparison to exceeding it was quick and easy, especially on a full moon like tonight, although he wouldn't be as strong as when he had all that excess energy. Last then stepped up with a manic grin, having been able to recover in the time that Izuku had bought for them. I do believe with your assistance, my lord, we could deal with that accursed hurricane once and for all. A bloody Sonic then appeared. And I believe the hedgehogs could be of assistance as well. Izuku looked at him oddly. Are you aware that you're wearing Wukong's intestines as a scarf? Sonic looked down, in fact not realizing he had someone's intestines wrapped round his neck. Oh yeah, it looks pretty neat, doesn't it? You think I could pull off wearing a scarf, boss? Izuku didn't have time for this, so he just ignored it. What do you mean you can help? You just ran out of energy and crashed into the ground at high speeds. That's where you're wrong, bossman. The ability that I gained thanks to you allows me to ignore all damage gained from high-speed collisions. Sure, it specifically crashes and punches and the like still hurt me, but it's pretty neat. Also, chaos control is different. What happens is that the chaos hedgehogs give me all their energy and then go into a comatose state until they regain their energy, which takes a couple hours, and since I was only using the energy for speed it lasted hours, which gave them time to recover. I could have kept on going, if not for the fact that I can only use that form once a day. Anyway, onto the way we can help. Well, we could have the chaos hedgehogs help Last go super, and if you can grant him some of your energy we could pull of an insane attack. Izuku nodded. That sounds good. I only have about a quarter of my energy back at the moment. So I just hope it's enough. Everyone got into position as Last his cane tightly. The chaos hedgehogs circled around him and entered his body as emeralds as he started to glow. Ha 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 ha, I can feel it. The power, this power, I feel like I could do anything. Last was feeling pure elation at this significant power boost. Having never felt this good before, however, this feeling was dampened when he felt Izuku's hand on his back and he was connected to the boy's reserves, causing the deer's eyes to widen. He felt like he was swimming in an ocean. It made his current one seem meaningless in comparison, made him feel insignificant in the face of overwhelming might. And this was only a quarter. What the hell was his master to have such overwhelming power in such a small body? This feelings only lasted for a couple seconds as he felt that ocean of power enter the lake that was his own as all the powers inside him fused and multiplied. He felt like he was going to burst, but this power. He wanted more. He had never felt this amazing, but he also didn't want to die. Hey, you fucking deer. You're fucking dead. His power was channeled into his staff as the energy changed and shifted it as it was transformed into a giant electric guitar. As he gripped it by the neck, tendrils of light played it as he started spinning before unleashing an arc of energy. It started rotating and picking up speed as winds whipped around it, first forming a tornado. Before it increased inside, it formed its own hurricane made of energy and clashed against the one made by the deer. The energy hurricane starting advancing towards the deer, pushing back their own hurricane. However, things didn't go as planned as the final 4 deer stepped forward and let out breaths of blue flames, continuously setting the hurricane aflame and pushing back against the demonic one. Fuck, Fenrir, we need firepower. Throw caution to the wind. Show them why you're my right hand. Fenrir let a savage grin come across his face as his palms glowed blue and icy snowflakes appeared around him, shredding frost. As he held out his palms, innumerable shards of razor-sharp shards of ice started blasting out, going towards the hurricane and spinning around it, meeting the fire as steam erupted and get swept up. Soon enough it was a song of ice and fire as the 2 hurricanes battled it out. However, HTIS was only enough to even it out. Izuku tried to think of what to do to even things out, and it came to him when he saw the body of the golden deer next to Wukong. Wukong, this may hurt, but bear with me. The monkey nodded as Izuku placed his hand on Wukong's back and drained as much energy from the monkey as he could. Luckily, Wukong's immortality meant that he had the fastest energy regeneration, but his reserves were nowhere near the size of Izuku's, which meant in the current time frame he couldn't completely refill it. When he had enough energy for what he needed, around a fifth of his normal reserves, he then placed his hand on the golden deer as energy coursed through it, arcing across like electricity as he tried to gain an understanding of it, as well as the electricity coursing into it helping it regenerate. He couldn't get much. He didn't have enough time to fully understand how its abilities worked, but he had enough. This wasn't an ability he liked to use much because he preferred to learn how to use his energy in different forms. This way just felt like cheating, and if he learned how to do this normally he would have a better understanding of how to use his power instead of just copying abilities like this. It also didn't allow him to use the abilities at their full power, although his energy did compensate for the difference. Then power wouldn't be what it could be if he had full mastery over the skill. With his remaining energy his eyes glowed red as a crimson bolt of electricity formed in his hand and started running before throwing the bolt like a javelin. It arced across the sky before crashing into Last's hurricane, causing the lighting spread through it as it mixed with the entire coursing through the wind. The lightning was the last straw in this chaotic battle because as the raging winds collided, the added elements made it more and more unstable until they both collapsed in on themselves and released a massive explosion of wind, fire, lighting, water and shards of ice. Thus, the reason why Izuku was hesitant to use anything other than pure energy to combat it showed itself as all the attacks that had been going around the hurricane now started coming at both sides. Out of energy and exhausted, Izuku panicked, not knowing what to do, so he just acted on instinct. Take cover. Many did, with Wukong covering some and Fenrir making a wall of ice shielding others. However, Last, who had used all his energy in that hurricane, was unable to move to cover, so Izuku pushed him down and shielded him with his own body. Ice shards impaled Izuku, water needles penetrated him, fire burnt his body, and his lightning came right back at his, spreading through his chest, just barely dissipating before it hit Last. Blood leaked from all the wounds around Izuku's body as he coughed up a pint of blood. You okay, Last? The deer man nodded dumbly as he stared up at his lord. The lord that despite his young age he thought infallible. In the training leading up to the battle Izuku had shown his power as well as during it. Last had thought Izuku was invincible, but now only one thought crossed his mind as Izuku's blood covered his face, hiding his expression. He can bleed. Blood leaked from all the wounds around Izuku's body as he coughed up a pint of blood. You okay, Last? The deer man nodded dumbly as he stared up at his lord. The lord that despite his young age he thought infallible. In the training leading up to the battle Izuku had shown his power as well as during it. Last had thought Izuku was invincible, but now only one thought crossed his mind as Izuku's blood covered his face, hiding his expression. He can bleed. Last's thoughts were running a mile a minute, the fact Izuku sacrificed himself for him going to the back of his mind. It was the blood splattered all over him, the blood that was not his own. It was Izuku's blood. Their leader could actually be wounded to this degree. He had been hurt in spars before, but his growth was so rapid that it was hard to injure him more than once. And it had never been to this degree. Last just kept thinking, he can bleed. He can hurt, he can die, over and over again until he was finally snapped out of it when Izuku collapsed. But he was caught by Sun Wukong. When the monkey spoke it drew everybody's attention. We're withdrawing. Luckily no one died in that explosion, but we have injured and our leader is down. Those deer have suffered as well, so we'll withdraw and come back later. Some were hesitant to follow the orders of Wukong, but when Fenrir backed him they all agreed. These two were the hands of the king, when Izuku was indisposed. So all forces retreated back to their camps on either side of the border between deer and demon territory. And Last's son saw everyone returning. He wriggled out of his mother's embrace and went to congratulate their victory. He saw all the injuries and the dark look on his father's face. However, what he saw next horrified him. Izuku, someone who he had come to look up to in the months leading up to the battle, he was in a critical state. He tried running to him, but Fenrir stopped him. Let me go, Fenny, I need to see him. The wolfman shook his head. The lord isn't in a state to see anyone right now. He's in critical condition, so we need to get him into his tent and let him rest. The boy solemnly nodded, but seeing Izuku's condition he let them pass. Izuku's tent was very different in comparison to the others. First off, it was bigger than the rest, by the request of his subjects. The inside was different as well. It was pitch black, as if no light could enter this place, which it was why it was up to Wukong to set Izuku down and look after him, as he was the one who could see the best in complete darkness. They all had night vision, but they still needed a small amount of light. However, Wukong, like Izuku, did not and could see without any light. Surrounded by complete darkness, Izuku's wounds started to heal. With him being incapacitated as he was now, he couldn't speed up his energy regeneration as he had done earlier, so he was slowly regenerating energy and using it to heal his wounds. A little red eye tried to peek in to see, but before it could see anything it was forcefully dragged away. Time passed and the sun was setting in the sky. Izuku stepped outside of his tent, having fully recovered. He didn't have 100% of his energy, but he had enough. All his demons were in top form, except for Ren. He looked like he was doing much better, however, he was still unconscious. He then looked over and saw the restrained deer. They so far had the golden deer and the giant stantler and a couple of antler manipulation deer. All that remained to go against would be the 7 white ear 20 wind manipulation and the 4 fire deer. With a plan in mind, Izuku gathered up all his troops, once again leaving behind last son and wife. Out of the corner of his eyes he saw the child with red cheeks and tears coming from the 3-year-old's eyes. He walked over and ruffled the boy's hair, being careful as to avoid his antlers. "It'll be alright, little guy. We'll be back before the moon is in the sky. I won't take them lightly like last time." Izuku turned around, not seeing the fearful look the boy had on his face as he looked ahead. Izuku led all the demons and marched to take out their current opponents, and they weren't disappointed, while all 4 flaming deer looked to be in perfect condition. However, now that he got a close look at them, one of them was clearly a child, which just angered him further. They may be animals, but how dare they send a child to face him, the white ear and wind deer, and seen better days. They seemed to have less numbers, 3 and 10 respectively. Looks like the final attacks ended up causing some casualties on that side. What confused Izuku was that they had bandages wrapped around them. Well, not bandages, more like leaves functioning as bandages, but it was interesting that they had some form of medicine. This warranted looking into. "I think it's time to show these Servadae bastards what we're made of, don't you?" He was met with cheers and everyone got ready to charge, but Izuku held his hand out. "It shall just be me and the clan heads in this assault." Fenrir, Wukong, Last, Sonic, Kurama and Shukaku stepped forward. Izuku let out an evil cackle as he held his hand to his eye, before raising it and lifting up his hair, showing his blood-red eyes. "Let's fuck shit up." He then bolted, leading the charge, only to be met with blasts of fire. However, he just kept running as jumping overhead was a wolf made of ice which let out a frosty ray. It collided with the flames, causing steam to erupt in the immediate area and the ground to freeze. Izuku then spun on the ice, building up momentum as red lightning crackled around him as he then threw it. Karyunos. It sparked and sped forward, and by the time the steam cleared, a fire deer with its head splattered could be seen. Pieces of its brain and head covered its comrades as they looked at it with horrified expressions before they contorted into anger. The wind picked up, but it was noticeably weaker than yesterday. They clearly didn't have it in them to make another hurricane. Izuku smirked. This was much more fun than commanding from the back, but the troops needed experience, so he couldn't just dominate the battlefield every time. To his left, a giant staff extended, ignoring the raging winds, and slammed into a WYR deer, splattering it across a tree, leaving a mess of blood, organs and fur. Izuku then held his hand out and caught a spinning blue ball of death and threw it with all his might, causing Sonic to shred through it right through a wind deer, resulting in a shower of gore. Sonic then bounced off a tree and caused another deer to suffer a similar fate. The elemental deers teamed up to release an inferno of fire backed by wind. Izuku backflipped high in the air to dodge it as sand came rushing through, colliding with the flames, and turning to glass mere inches away from the enemies' faces. Izuku was finally up close and punched right the skull of a white ear, and grabbing the other behind it and threw it into a tree behind his soldiers. Somehow it barely survived, but it now lay unconscious. Now up close and personal, Izuku held up both his and released a bright burst of light from them, blinding the deer so that they could not see the attacks coming their way. Last had appeared behind the wind deer and decapitated half of them with his axe cane and orange energy tendrils wrapped around the fire deer's necks, although in the case of the calf it instead wrapped around the body. They tried to turn into flame to get out of the attacks, but the fire was drained into the energy, and so they were left tangible, and soon enough so much energy was drained that they were barely alive, looking like husks of their former selves. Izuku stood in front of the remaining 7 deer. "I'll give you one more chance, Bo, and I may let you live." Wanting to live and seeing the power coming from this individual and his follows, and although he may be a small boy, they got down onto their haunches and bowed down to him. Good. Sand burst from the ground, forming cocoons around them as they were dragged back to Izuku's camp. "I must thank you. You showed me a weakness I wasn't aware I had. I may be strong, but a combined attack from many can still bring me to my knees. I shall work to correct this." Izuku had Shukaku grab any living deer and made his way back to camp. This attack had gone much better than the last. "Shukaku, I want you to keep all the deer wrapped in sand until I come out of my tent. Is that understood?" The Tanuki man nodded his head, accepting his lord's order as they marched back, and Izuku headed into his tent after ordering his soldiers to rest recuperate. inside of his tent and gathered as much energy as he could for the draining task that he knew was ahead. It was midday when Izuku emerged from his tent and he gathered everyone up. Soldiers, we have won a glorious victory, but this is a mere fraction of their total forces, and we have lost some of our own brethren. Do not let this sadden you. Let it fuel your rage and let it guide you forward in our conquest of this land. Now I do believe it's time these deer start paying reparations for our lost comrades. Last to me. The deer man nodded, a manic smile on his face as he went to Izuku's side. The two looked at the 15 deer in front of them. Izuku had Fenrir make a large bowl of ice as he had last fill it with his blood. Now drink. He then had 14 Tanukas dunk the deer's head into the large bowl of blood, only to be let out when it was gone. While they were doing that, Izuku went to the one deer who wasn't dunked. The golden deer who had only recently woken up. Now you better not spill a drop. The deer tried to resist, but Izuku had Fenrir and Wukong hold its mouth open as he made a cut on his wrist and let the blood flow into the deer's mouth. This continued for quite a while, until he was satisfied. You shall be reborn anew. No longer serving those deer you used to, you shall now serve me under a new name. You are now Saranian. The golden deer was encompassed in a golden glow until before him was a 7-foot-tall woman with blonde golden hair and yellow eyes. She was dressed in an amber toga and had golden antlers coming from her head. Interesting. I expected you to be male since you had antlers. The woman shook her head. No, my lord. I was the only female of my kind to grow antlers. It perplexed all. But once I proved my strength to them, they no longer cared about my antlers and allowed me to lead a number of deer. Izuku's brow then furrowed at her. So that hurricane was your idea then? Saranian bowed her head. Indeed it was, my lord. It was meant to be a last resort against a superior opponent. There are 100 wind manipulators. With them we are able to keep much stronger opponents away from our territory. I was only granted 20 to lead against you, which is why it's as weak as it was. That statement rattled Izuku, because if it was true, that meant that it could have been 4 times stronger than it actually was. He had no idea how he would have handled that at full power. However, that was an issue for another time. He turned to Last and his son. Junior was by his side watching his father drown their fellow deer in his own blood until they had drunk it all. Now don't leave a single drop, you pathetic whelps. I don't want any bit of my precious blood to be wasted. This caused fear to run through them. Despite being herbivores, they drank the blood as if it was more precious than water on a hot summer's day. But by the time they were done, there was not even a drop of blood left. The deer started to shine as they transformed, their very biology shifting as their fur started to turn gray, and all their teeth sharpened, turning into fangs. Izuku walked over and started to name all of the deer, making sure to keep a tight hold on his energy to make sure it didn't drain too fast. It took a few minutes to come up with names for all of them, but soon he approached the last one, the smallest one. In fact, now that he was paying attention, she looked around. The size Junior was before he was turned into a demon. This little one was a calf, which only angered him more. What were they doing sending a child to the front lines? This only enraged him, but he was careful to not let it show on his face. However, she was snarling up at him but also looking at him with reverence. Much like all the others, she was confused on whether or not she should hate him or revere him. It seemed the new blood coursing through them was conflicted with their original mindset. He then spoke, giving the calf a new name. Henceforth you shall be known as Rosie. As he spoke, much like the others, she started to glow before her human form was revealed. She had white hair, pitch black eyes, and a pale gray skin. She was also dressed in a black and red Lolita dress and sun hat. Izuku nodded, now seeing the reverent looks on their faces. Who do you all serve? In unison all of them spoke. We serve you, my lord. Izuku smiled. Now get settled, we'll rest for a week before our campaign. Now Junior, come here. Junior left his mother's, Amaya's, side as he walked up to Izuku. Junior, I would like to meet Rosie. She's a similar age to you. I'd like it if you could help her get used to things as well as the new knowledge that would have been entered her mind. The young deer shyly shuffled up to the kneeling Rosie and held out his hand. My name is Junior, it's nice to meet you. The deer girl took the offered hand and used it to stand. GG greetings, she stuttered as she acclimated to the new language and customs that filled her head. Rosie then grabbed the sides of her dress and curtsied just like her mind showed her. My name is Rosie. It's a pleasure to meet you. She flashed him a fang-filled smile as he responded in kind before taking her hand. Come on, I'll show you to your tent. he stopped mid-step as he realized he didn't know which of the new tents that were set up were for Rosie. Izuku just chuckled seeing this. "It's the one next to yours, Junior." The boy nodded his head before taking her with him. The next week was focused on getting the new deer up to snuff, used to their new powers as well as clearing any animosity built up, as if it was left to fester it could get in the way, and it was successful for the most part, except for one Tanuki, Eren. His hate for the deer and all other non-demons remained strong as ever, but Izuku was able to temper this hate just enough for Eren not try to kill them. And so Izuku continued his advance on the deer, going further into their territory and facing a number of opponents. In his conquest, the next battle he had was his forces of 70 demons, 8 wolves, 27 tanuki, 12 deer, 20 hedgehogs, 2 foxes, vs 90 deer. Izuku wasn't one to take children to the battlefield. Sahi Jr. and Rosie were left behind with Amaya. The battle stretched out for 3 days and they were able to capture 20 deer, but there was a cost. 2 tanuki and 1 hedgehog lost their lives. This trend continued for 2 months, a battle, mourn the dead. Indoctrinating the captured and putting them under last's command. The war with the deer was coming close to an end. There had been a total of 5 battles so far. The first against 7, the second versus 90, next was when the numbers reached triple digits fighting 100 deer, and it only increased from there with 135 deer being fought against in the 4th battle, and the 5th saw a battle against 150. It was now November 11th and it was now the penultimate battle and would be different from all the others up until now. Those had been drawn out direct confrontations. This would be a siege. Izuku and his forces were currently standing outside the first of the bases set up by the deer. They were no longer taking over camps but actual bases. It was a wonder to Izuku that they were able to make a base large enough to house 200 like this without hands, but he guessed that was the power of quirks. Another thing that had interested him was the increasing medical developments that the deer had. It was thanks to the information he gained from the deer he captured. Apparently they had a blue-nosed deer that could transform. Alongside these transformations came innate knowledge of medicine that only improved as this deer got older. Although he couldn't help but laugh at the name given to the deer, Cotton, he would give the deer a much better name when he came under his control. Izuku's forces had grown much larger than from when he had first started out. He had the 6 heads of the clans Fenrir, Wukong, Shukaku, Sonic, Kurama and last. Then there are their subordinates 7 wolves, 14 tanuki, 10 hedgehogs, 1 fox, and 70 deer. With the increase in the number of deer, Saranian was allocated as last second in command. Much to his irritation, it only gave him another reason. What that reason was for, well, that's for another time. Izuku stood in front of the forest of antlers that acted as a barrier to the base. If they were normal antlers it would have been normal, however they were just antler-shaped, because instead of being the normal white or brown there was a metallic sheen to it. They must have some sort of deer with a metal manipulation ability. Let's see how it holds up to a little lightning. Sari let them have it. The deer woman bowed her head. Yes, my liege. She held her hand up to the sky before bringing it down. And alongside it came a strike of lightning which struck the metal horns. Leaving no damage, she furrowed her brow and bit her lip. She held out both hands cupping them as lightning charged between them before screaming and letting out a beam of lightning, only for it to do nothing on impact. My lord, it seems impossible to penetrate it with lightning. Izuku began to think. Using the wind deer was an option, but that technique was too deadly and it could cause casualties on both sides if they weren't careful, so that was more of an absolute last resort. This single barrier is one of the things that would enrage Izuku to no end over the course of this war. Because he spent over 2 weeks trying to break through it. They started this siege on the 11th of November, and now it was the 29th. He'd read about some sieges taking months or even over a year, but he didn't think it would take long given his power. However, nothing to worked, and what's worse is that it was seemingly getting larger and stronger. In the beginning it just circled the deer base, now it went up and creating a dome cutting off any aerial attacks. It went underground, and it was seemingly adapting as well, cause after an attack did even a little damage, a few more uses of it resulted in no damage at all. They learned this the hard way. After a few wind attacks managed to cut through the dome, and so they kept trying, but got diminishing returns. Izuku, who was already at his wits' end, decided to use the hurricane, but by then the dome had built up enough wind resistance that it didn't even buckle under the pressure of the hurricane. Next to this base, there were many destroyed trees, from where Izuku actually acted his age and went on a tantrum about not being able to get past that damnable barrier. Izuku was pacing forth within the war tent they had set up. Large bags under his eyes, he hadn't slept this bad since he was living with his mother. Who's got any ideas on how to break into that damn thing? No one said anything. This siege had put them through their paces, everyone was sick of that barrier. However, Wukong's eyes and runes appeared around his throat for a split second as he suddenly remembered something. Words of an old friend of his, "You know, Wukong, I wasn't always like I am now. Before, all I did happened when I was just a small-time leader. I was corrupted by those I grew up with, sometimes just thinking pure power and attacking things would be enough. What I forgot to do was think strategically, not just different ways to use a power. But actually think. A friend of mine once locked himself in a house and I needed him to come out. I kept banging on the door trying to force him to come out. Nothing was working, but in the end all I had to was coax him out instead." The memory ends with his friend reaching out towards him, and it's all fuzzy from there. Hundreds of years in that cave must really have done a number on his memory, although he doesn't understand how his recent memory was affected, but whatever, Wukong still couldn't think of why he didn't remember this earlier. Getting over his flashback, he stepped forward. What we need isn't brute force. It's obvious that we don't have the strength to break through the barrier. With what we've thrown at them, this base must be entirely for the defense. If they have a unified attack that can bring us to our knees, why not a unified defense? Everyone nodded along, including Izuku. Then what do you suggest, Wukong? The monkey man started walking around the war room. It's clear that we can't get past their unified defense. What we need is to draw them out. Make them lower the barrier. With how we've been relentlessly attacking it, we won't be able to trick them into thinking we left. What we need to do is get them to leave themselves. My lord, you gained a poisonous ability from the wolves you fought in the past. No. Izuku nodded his head. Well then, let's see how well they fare against it. Izuku smirked. Sounds like a plan. He approached the horned barrier, arms outstretched. His left arm glowed purple as the right erupted in flames. He brought his hands together before releasing a burst of purple flames. Fire had been proven not to work, but poison now, that was another story. They hadn't tried that yet. As the fire spread, the metal started to corrode. It was slowly regenerating, but the corrosion would outlast it for now. However, this wasn't the result that mattered. It was the smoke. The fire could never reach the end of the barrier, but smoke. Pump enough through and the poison smoke will blast out the other side. There's no way they'd stay trapped in that poisoned dome. He thought everything was going to plan as he heard screams, but the screams died down and the barrier didn't come down. He knew they were all still alive. He could hear them on the other side. They really did have a damn good medic. Izuku then gained an evil smirk. Let's see that medic try and stop asphyxiation. Shukaku sand around the dome. Now, following the command quickly, Shukaku surrounded the dome with sand and Izuku turned it all to glass in short order. If this doesn't draw them out, nothing will. Izuku placed his hands on the glass and let a continuous burst of a violet fire. Purple smoke filled the dome as Izuku continually pumped in fire. This strategy worked as the antler barrier dropped and a giant monster appeared in its place, confusing many as the first thought that ran through everybody's head when they saw it was a tanuki. The surprise was short-lived as the monster started punching the glass and eventually it broke, allowing oxygen to flood in. The monster let out a loud roar before charging away. However, Izuku wasn't having any of this. He was already at his wit's end and was not giving them another chance to put that barrier up. Izuku's eyes glowed a shining blue as he held out his hands, forming a katana made of ice, and unleashed most of his energy, forming a giant snowflake made of energy beneath the encampment. The blue energy started to encapsulate all living beings, forming a barrier and wrapping around them. Izuku held his ice sword in the air and muttered a single phrase. Bleak December. He then slashed down, causing all the energy to attack the monster and all the deer, freezing them before forming blades of ice which started slashing their flesh, all while leaving the ice unharmed. Izuku's sword shifted into a giant synth as he slashed towards the camp, causing an explosion of ice shards to burst from the center, killing all inside and slicing off one of the antlers of the monster and injuring it enough that it started to shrink until all that remains was a small blue-nosed reindeer. Izuku picked it up by its broken antler. God, I hope you're the medic. Everybody, grab the corpses and bring them back to base. We'll eat well tonight. Izuku turned and walked away, still holding onto the small reindeer. not noticing Last's look. Such a waste of good deer, they could have been of use. When they got back to base, Izuku decided not to waste any time and immediately injected his blood into the reindeer, causing it to transform into a small bipedal reindeer. It was around this time that it started to wake, and just as it was about to freak out, Izuku glared at it, using some energy freezing it in place. "You serve under me now." "Got that." The tiny reindeer nodded quickly as it was placed into the ground. "Serenian will look after you for now, help you acclimate." "Alright, you need a name." Izuku then looked at the horn he removed. "Your name is now Chopper." The little reindeer continued his rapid nodding until a random woman picked him up and he started freaking out. "Ah, help me my lord, I'm being kidnapped." Izuku just shook his head. "Make sure he acclimated quick enough, Serenian. See if you can find out if he's the doctor or not." Serenian started stroking Chopper's head. "Your wish is my command, my lord," and took the tiny reindeer to the others under Last's command. Izuku smirked, and looked behind him, seeing Wukong and Fenrir. "Just one more battle and we'll have conquered the deer. Are you two ready?" Fenrir knelt down and said, "Yes my lord," while Wukong just gave him a cheeky grin and a thumbs up. "You bet boss." Izuku just shook his head. Good. Izuku was prepping for the next battle. It would be the final battle with the deer. With them conquered, he'd have a larger territory to manage, and hopefully more animals in his territory would ally themselves with him, increasing his forces too. However, to keep his campaign going, his soldiers alive, which is why he was in the war tent with Chopper, Fenrir and Wukong. The little reindeer boy was trembling in his seat. The aura the three were giving off was terrifying. Chopper was wrapped up in leaf bandages he made for himself to help with his injuries. Crossed on leg over and put his head onto his fist. He then eyed Chopper up and down, seeing the leafy bandages. Chopper however misinterpreted this look and started bowing. "Please don't eat me lord, I beg of you, please don't eat me." Izuku let out a sigh. This was clearly going to be a common occurrence with this deer. "Get up." Chopper looked at Izuku confused. "I said get up. Don't make me repeat myself." Chopper in a panic quickly got back into his seat. Izuku couldn't believe that this was the giant monster that had the guts to fight him. "I'm not going to eat you. What I want is your skills. Tell me, how are your medical skills?" Chopper just looked down. "They're not the best. They're nothing compared to the doctrine. I was just her apprentice." The little guy then started to cry. And now she's dead." Izuku face palmed. It was just his luck to kill the best doctor the deers had, but he'd have to deal with it for now. Having Chopper would be better than nothing. Wanting to see his skills in person, Izuku took Chopper to the medical tent. While most small injuries healed quickly, more severe ones took time for others, and they didn't have any medicinal technology on them. Although Izuku was pleasantly surprised when he saw Chopper in action, he clearly underestimated the deer, because once he got into doctor mode there was no stopping him. He was setting bones left and right and rapidly creating leafy bandages and splints. He even had the courage to berate Cerberus once he had come in with a spike of wood going through his paw that he had somehow got stabbed with. It did make him wonder, however, how good this doctoring was. Deciding to see if he could boost Chopper's skills, Izuku headed over to the library. He doubted there would be anything on medicine but remained hopeful, and he wasn't let down, because he found another book written by IMS, Medicinal Memoirs by IMS and TT.C. Izuku flicked through it and saw it was filled with what appeared to be advanced medicinal techniques. It started off very simple but became extremely complex. Having gotten the book he wanted, Izuku decided to head back. He had no idea who this IMS was and how he knew so much, but he was glad for the information. When Izuku got back, he saw Chopper taking a break after having treated all the prisoners. "Good job, Chopper. You can have this as a reward." Chopper didn't know what to expect as a reward, but a book wasn't it. When he saw the medicinal book, he had stars in his eyes. He was so enamored by the book that he didn't notice the runes appear on the back. Izuku did, however they disappeared too quickly for him to get a proper look at them. When Chopper opened the book, it confused him because it was different from what he saw. Some pages were blank and others had different text. It seemed like it was guiding the reader to the conclusions rather than outright stating the medicinal techniques. "Thank you, my lord. With this I can learn so much more about medicine." Izuku nodded and then walked off to plan the final assault of the deer, all while thinking, what were those runes and why did they feel so familiar? He shook his head, putting those thoughts to the back of his mind. He had a war to plan. The wind howled around Izuku as thunder crackled in the sky. Izuku was flying in the air, wings flapping as he looked down at the final stronghold of the deer. This battle would be different from the others, there were only 50 deer. But they weren't like the run-of-the-mill deer they had faced before, they were the members of the leading clan of deer, the Nara clan, all having controls over shadows. Wukong had gone against some of them before, but there were many more now, and the weather was in the deer's favor. It was stormy, the clouds in the sky created more than enough shadows for them to use. This was why instead of charging in with a large army, Izuku would go with an elite strike squad. He had recruited Fenrir, Wukong, Shukaku, Sari, to come with him. They each would have 10 opponents each. Last wasn't too pleased at being excluded, but he saw him taking Junior off to train, so at least he was making use of his time. Kurama and Sonic had been excluded as well. Sonic had no defensive abilities, and even if they couldn't register his speed, all he had to do was step in a shadow and it would be over. It was similar case for Kurama. He hadn't discovered his true abilities yet. So far he had better regeneration than anyone except Izuku and Wukong and super strength, but that was it. These skills couldn't warrant the risk of bringing him along. Izuku roared over the thunder. "Are you ready?" His 4 subordinates let out battle cries as they all charged towards the stronghold. Just as they began their charge, shadows retreated from the surrounding area. When the strike squad arrived at the stronghold, all 50 deer were waiting, ready to fight. There were even some familiar faces. All the deer in black fur and in dark horns, they all looked similar. Except for one, it had no fur on its face. Instead of fur, its face was covered in burn scars. Izuku smirked at the deer. "Those burns suit you." This just enraged the deer and his subordinates. Each leader was eyeing down their counterparts before Izuku yelled out, "Charge!" While the deer yelled out, "For Nara!" Each side charged at each other, and as they did, the deer acted first and many created shadow deer, increasing the size of their forces. Izuku was the first to act. Chaos, flaming chains wrapped around his arms and blades formed in his hand and he swung them in a wide arc, letting the chains fly to give more distance. The shadow deer that were approaching him were destroyed by the chaos blades. The others were also surrounded by shadow deer, and each had a different method of dealing with them. Shukaku tried crushing them with his sand, but whenever they were crushed by the sand they just poofed into smoke and reformed further ahead. When they started getting dangerously close, Shukaku he wrapped himself up in a dome of sand, protecting himself from any and all attacks. Fenrir had created a blade of ice and was slashing at all who came close to him. The shadow deer however just kept reforming, seemingly uninjured. They got so close that Fenrir released a burst of ice to send them back. He was currently in a stalemate. They couldn't do anything to him, but he couldn't do anything to them. Wukong just didn't give a fuck. He was swinging his staff around, attacking all the shadow deer he could while making his way towards their creators with a manic smile on his face. He suffered countless injuries. His limbs were torn off, horns ran straight through the stomach, but eventually he got to the Nara deer and bashed their skulls in, or so he thought, as they corpses melted into the shadows and went towards the clash between Izuku and the clan head. Sari was very successful because she was wielding dual lightning bolts in her hand and was throwing them at all that she could, and as each lightning bolt slammed into a shadow deer, it poofed into smoke and never reformed. Some did get close, while both bolts were thrown. She wasn't unarmed however, because she quickly recalled the bolts, and with lightning speed they returned to her and she used them to cut down the shadows surrounding her in a burst of lightning. She finally got close enough to the real deer and decapitated all of them with her lightning bolts. This wasn't the end because much like Wukong's deer they melted into the shadows and went to their clan head. Seeing her friends in trouble, Sari decided to step in and destroy the shadow deer surround Fenrir. She smirked at him. "Looks like you could use some help." Fenrir grunted but nodded. "I don't know what you did but my guys keep reforming." He then gestured to the bloody Wukong. "And my regeneration isn't good enough to do what that crazy bastard did." Sari nodded as she kept fighting off the shadow deer. "It must be the light. My lord's attacks are destroying the shadows around him, and my lightning defeats them as well. It must be something to do with that." Fenrir nodded, and that's when he got an idea. He created a new sword. This one however looked like an icy prism. "Gimme some light." Sari condensed the lighting in his hand and directed a beam of energy to the sword, causing it to glow and give off a brilliant light. The wolfman smirked and ran towards the shadow deer and sliced, decapitating them, and to his relief they didn't reform. Sari and Fenrir continued their advance until they got to the Nara deer. They were different however because before they were even attacked they went into the shadows to stand behind their clan head. Shukaku was the only one having issues now. He was still in his sand dome and had eyes floating around it seeing the shadow deer watching them ram into the dome with no success. The other 3 members of the strike force decided to help out and went directly for the Nara deer. Wukong bashed their brains in, Fenrir decapitated them and Sari stopped their hearts with lighting and much like the others their corpses melted into the shadows and went in Izuku's direction, with their creators dead the shadow deer poofed into smoke. With Izuku, he was winging his chaos blades slicing all who got near him, and even those at a distance as he let go of the blades and let the flaming swords fly forward they missed the leader, but it was all according to plan as they stabbed into wall of the stronghold, the heavy rain being the only reason it didn't burst into flames. He tugged on the chains and used them to launch himself at the leader planning on kicking the deer trapped between the chains, but he was able to dodge. The deer turned his body into shadows, and wrapped around Izuku's form and a shadowy deer head formed over Izuku. Do you think you can defeat me, the mighty Shukaku, Lord of the Shadows? Izuku just smirked. You don't stand a chance. He then felt a tight pressure coming down on him as Shukaku tried to crush him but he just smirked and flexed. Nice try. Flames licked his form before bursting out in a roaring inferno but Shukaku once again dodged as at the first sight of flames he jumped off Izuku and used his shadow form to go through a crack in the ground for cover. And using this vantage point he used it to send a burst of shadow spikes through the ground. Izuku was able to dodge most of them but after he was hit by one more speared through his body, and used his energy to shift around the organs in his body so nothing vital was hit, but he still took damage. Blood spilled from his mouth as Shukaku reformed. Not so cocky now. Izuku smiled showing his bloody teeth. Oh, I wouldn't say that. Despite being impaled by so many spikes Izuku raised his hand and his eyes crackled with red lightning. He slammed his hand down and with it a bolt of lightning. It came down to fast for Shukaku to react but the deer was lucky because shadows wrapped around him forming a cocoon. All shadows in the surrounding area including the spikes stated to writhe and move as they wrapped around the cocoon increasing its size. Izuku could only look on in confusion as his subjects came to support him. I see you are all finished, good job. Sari looked at Izuku with concern. Are you okay my lord? Izuku just nodded. I'll be fine, for now we need to break into that cocoon. Wukong brazenly walked up to the cocoon and knocked on it with his fist. Shouldn't be too hard to break through this thing. And it was as Wukong knocked on it 4 shadows burst from it going straight through Wukong's chest causing him to fall to the floor in a pile of limbs. His head rolled towards Izuku as the shadows formed to feline-like creatures. Well, I didn't see that coming. Izuku rolled his eyes and threw Wukong's head to his limbs where he regenerated. He then held his hand out to the felines and let out a burst of fire. However they remained seemingly unaffected. Well, that's different. Sari sent a burst of lightning at the and it similarly had no affect. Fenrir charged in and slashed with his sword but it just bounced off a one and it fired dart-like projectiles at him. Luckily for him sand wrapped around him defending him from the attacks. As he was dragged back by the sand one of the shadows jumped into the air and spun like a shuriken and sent itself at them but the regenerated Wukong was ready for action and blocked it with his staff. However he wasn't ready for a follow-up attack as a shadow burst from the ground and swallowing him like a Venus flytrap chewing on him and slamming him from side to side. Izuku and Sari intervened and sent bolts of lightning at the shadow and it spat out Wukong. What happened next confounded them as it didn't reform but instead a glowing orb formed. The Wukong with no regard for his own safety started attacking the orb with all his might, missing the extended spear that went straight through his chest. The 4th and final shadow had extended itself and speared through Wukong. His efforts however weren't for nothing because when the orb reformed it was different. The shadow this time was glowing red and once again swallowed Wukong but this time at the end of the slamming it exploded and was no more. That's when Izuku realized its weakness, hit it with ranged attacks until it shows its core. He then backflipped and avoided another spear. As he stood on it the shadow looked confounded giving Izuku the chance to send repeated lightning bolts at it which blasted it back and even causing it to turn red causing Izuku more confusion but he let it be and kept dodging its attacks and before long it exploded. The other 2 were dealt with quickly as well. Wukong just used his sand to crush it until it revealed its core causing its destruction and consequent explosion. Sari electrocuted the final one and Fenrir delivered the finishing blow with his icy blade, encasing it in ice to avoid the explosion. After all the shadows were dealt with they all approached to destroy it. But it was too late as cracks ran along it and smoke burst and followed by roar as a gigantic creature followed, lighting up the whole area. For darkness is the absence of light, then the reverse could apply. Light is the absence of darkness. As this creature of darkness rose from the cocoon, it absorbed not just the shadows but any and all darkness also went to him, leaving nothing but light in its wake, blinding the demons. Gah! They all cried out, and Izuku felt his powers weakening as he reverted back into his normal form. His horns became little stubs, his claws but small diamonds on the backs of his hands, and his wings shrunk. The others felt themselves weaken as well. Luckily Fenrir was able to use his eyes to make glasses that refracted enough light to let them see. But the weakness remained. They all looked up, and the giant mass of shadows that took the form of a deer, and Wukong spoke. What the hell do we even do against that thing? It was then he noticed that Izuku was on the floor, high eyes unfocused, and he was breathing heavily. Road. Low. Ku. Izuku wasn't focusing on anything right now. In fact, he missed the giant antlers heading his way. Wukong had to grab him and dodge. He was weak. He felt so weak. He hasn't been this weak ever since he was with that woman. In that room, he was so weak. He wasn't supposed to be weak anymore, but nothing ever changes. He's still weak. That's when he was snapped out of his daze by Wukong, who started slapping and shouting at him. Izuku, focus. We need you right now. We can't have you zoning out. Wukong could feel though the bond that something was wrong with Izuku, but now wasn't the time to be gentle. Thank you, Wukong. Izuku quickly found his bearings and looked at the beast. Well, looking was a stretch because he couldn't see anything with all this light around. He could only see the deer because there was no light there at all. He didn't have another moment to think as it started charging at them. All the demons evaded and tried sending out various attacks, but in their weakened state they couldn't do much to damage it. Fenrir could barely send out any ice, Sari could only produce light shocks, and Shukaku could only move small parts of sand. Wukong, however, felt a bringing on his left biceps. He looked down and saw the runes. When he touched them, much like his staff, a weapon popped out of it. A white sword like those carried by the samurai of old. It looks flashy, but the blade seems to be top quality. Boss. He then threw the blade to Izuku and branded his own staff. Izuku turned to Wukong and saw the sword coming at him, and as he caught it, memories rushed into his mind. He couldn't make much sense of them, but the sword forms came to mind and he rushed forward and swing. The blade was sharp enough that it managed to cut through, but it wasn't enough and it regenerated shortly after. Izuku let out a tisk and jumped back as it tried to stomp on him. We need to land a fatal blow or he'll just recover. He had no idea, however, on how to deliver such a blow, but he gained an idea when I saw the deer charging at Sari. The deer woman couldn't get out of the way in time and pushed her to safety and swing, cutting though its teeth and jumping through its mouth. My lord, boss, they all cried out, seeing Izuku jump into the mouth of the beast. Seeing that it ate Izuku, it reared up in celebration and prepared to slam its hooves on the rest, but it screamed out in pain. Izuku was slashing at everything he could, cutting his way through the deer's body, and that's when he landed on a black bone and saw what he was aiming for below him, pulsating and releasing a shadowing energy. He smirked, feeling his strength coming back to him. There was no light in here, and that made Izuku all that stronger. Using his night vision, he spied all the weakest points and jumped down. He ran electricity through the blade and stuck as hard as he could and released a surge of lightning, stopping the heart, and to ensure it was enough, he started cutting up everything attached to it. The deer was about to slam its hooves onto the demons, but suddenly it stopped and collapsed to the side, and from its chest a giant hole burst open, causing all the darkness to be let out and the world returned to normal. Izuku marched out behind, dragging the heart behind him, much to everyone's elation. And they all knelt down in front of him, and it was Fenrir that spoke first. Congratulations, my lord. You have successfully conquered the deer. Izuku smiled but shook his head. Thank you. But this is only the beginning. He then looked to Wukong. Where did you get this blade? Fenrir shrugged. I suddenly felt a burning on my bicep, and there were suddenly runes there. When I touched it, this sword popped out. Izuku looked at the blade. It's so white, so pure, it feels wrong for someone like me to wield a virtuous blade like this. He shook his head, getting rid of those thoughts, and gained a look of confusion. Let me see your arm. Wukong approached and offered Izuku his arm. The demon lord started studying it but saw nothing. He did, however, sense a very familiar energy. It felt like his own, but also different. These runes, they keep popping and they feel so familiar. The energy, It's demonic in nature. What's going on? He sat in front of the giant heart and started to meditate. He wanted to store this heart much like Wukong's weapons. Each time he's seen the runes it was only for brief moments, never long enough to be able to properly see them, so he just let his energy do the work. He let his desire to store the heart in rune form be known, and he felt his energy guide him to place his hand on the heart, and the runes spread from his body and coated the heart. He opened his eyes and saw the kanji of the runes. The heart started to shrink until nothing remained, and Izuku felt something on his chest. He looked down and saw that the runes were now on his chest over his heart. He smiled. This warrants further attention, but for now let's raid the stronghold. He now have a way to transfer for more materials. The rest nodded and followed Izuku. They looted as much as they could, and Izuku sealed all that they stole. And eventually they arrived at the final housing area. And there was female deer. She was dead, blood pooled around her, but there were 2 unconscious pitch-black baby deer. She must have died giving birth to them. Izuku sensed something about one of the calves. It had great potential. Sari, give the one on your left you blood. I'll give the one on the right mine. The 2 gave their blood to the calves, and Izuku spoke. Time for the names. The one on the left. In honor of besting Shikaku I shall call him Shikamaru, and this one I shall call him Jinwoo. Sari and Izuku picked up the 2 deer as they transformed into babies. Now let's get back. I do believe it's time to celebrate our victory. With smiles on their faces they went back to the base to celebrate with the rest of the troops. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.